of unfinished business that we overlooked at our last commission meeting, and is dealing with the ethics evaluation of Commissioner Hobgood. And Jesse, would you take us through that, please, sir?
I certainly will. The State Ethics Commission has reviewed Mr. Hobgood's statement of economic interest for actual and potential conflicts of interest pursuant to Chapter 138A of the North Carolina General Statutes and did not find an actual conflict of interest or the likelihood of a conflict of interest. Mr. Hobgood fills the role of a person actively engaged in recreational sports fishing who may not derive more than 10% of annual earned income from sports fishing activities.
Okay, thank you very much. We're supposed to read this into the record each time we have a new commissioner, and thank you, Jesse, for doing that. Okay, we're going to go to Jason Rock for rule suspension.
It's got low battery. All right, that's better. Like I was saying, we have a couple of rule suspensions we need to talk about. In accordance with division policy, anytime there's a new rule suspension in between commission meetings, we bring it to the next commission meeting for the commission to vote on to continue those rule suspensions. So the first one we have to do is for implementation of Amendment 2 to the striped mullet FMP, which was recently adopted. So that plan adopted a reduced possession limit for the recreational fishery, taking the possession limit from 200 fish to 100 fish, as well as allowing charter boats to keep up to 400 fish even in advance of a trip. So we had to suspend part of Rule 15A in CAC 03M 0502, which set the 200 mullet per person per day recreational possession limit. And then the second rule is in regards to Amendment 2 to the shrimp fishery management plan that was adopted earlier this year, or a couple years ago. But that plan adopted a year-round closure in all crab spawning sanctuaries for shrimp trawls. So we had to suspend a portion of Rule 15A NCAC 03L 0205 crab spawning sanctuaries, which only had a seasonal closure for trawls in the spawning sanctuaries. So we need the commission to vote to continue the suspension of portions of those two rules.
Any questions on these? If not, can I have a motion to suspend these rules?
So moved.
So I move Commissioner Roller, second. Second, Commissioner Bland. Any other discussion? Roll call vote, please, Jesse.
Commissioner Bethea?
Aye.
Commissioner Blanton?
Aye.
Commissioner Claus?
Aye.
Commissioner Corbett?
Yes.
Commissioner Gardner?
Aye.
Commissioner Hobgood?
Aye.
Commissioner Rader?
Aye.
Commissioner Roller?
Aye.
And Chairman Bizzle.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate your work. Next, we're going into our rulemaking. Catherine Bloom, assume your usual position.
Good morning. One of these meetings, I won't be doing double duty. I'll be up here faster, Mr. Chairman. Sorry about that.
No problem at all.
Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Catherine Bloom. I'm the division's rulemaking coordinator. And as I usually do, I'll start with a quick reminder on a couple statutory items. There are two laws that affect your rulemaking directly as far as the timetable. One is Session Law 2019-198, and the other is General Statute 14-4.1. And these laws require that any rule that creates a new criminal offense or otherwise subjects a person to criminal penalties are automatically subject to legislative review. You're going to hear me talk about this repeatedly in all of my reports moving forward in perpetuity. But we do have some new folks, and so I thought it was good to spend just a moment on that. And so when those rules are automatically subject to legislative review, the point is it takes more time. And so it's important to just set expectations for the timetable of rulemaking. And you do have over 300 rules, and about a third of your rules are subject to these laws. And so I'll remind you when it's relevant that those are in play as far as the timetable for rulemaking. So in the rulemaking section of your materials, there is a memo and supporting documents. And I usually pause here if you do want to follow along. The memo is the first item. And sometimes with all this technical stuff, it's easier if you want to read along with me. The action today is to vote on notice of text for rulemaking to begin the process for the 8 rules in your 2024-2025 rulemaking cycle. Now, before we get to that, I need to give you an update on last year's cycle, so that's the 2023-2024 cycle. In May of last year, you approved notice of text for rulemaking, so the same step as you'll be asked to do today, and that was to begin the process for a very large package of rules, 103 in total. And there's a table in your materials that shows the timetable and all the steps for that package. There was a news release issued last August 1st, and that began the public comment process. The rules were published in the North Carolina Register on that date as well. And you accepted public comments from August 1st through October 2nd, and we did hold a public hearing August 16th last year. You received the public comments at your November 2023 meeting, and at that time you gave final approval of 83 of the 103 rules. Those were voted on at that time to meet readoption deadlines. So 80 of the 83 rules became effective April 1st of this year, and there were 3 others that were automatically subject to legislative review, as I talked about at the top of my report. Those 3 rules eventually became effective June 17th of this year, and so all 83 of those are in the most recent supplement to your collection of rules that's dated August 1st. So all 83 rules are totally finished. So we still had 20 left. At your May meeting this year, you were provided with another copy of the public comments received for that cycle. Those were the comments that you received last fall, so we gave you another copy of those and asked you to give final approval of the remaining 20 rules in the package, which you did. And those subjects pertain to data collection and harassment prevention for the conservation of marine and estuarine resources, oyster sanctuaries, and lastly, conforming changes for a variety of topics, including the shellfish relay program, shellfish leases and franchises, and shellfish sanitation. So those rules, all 20 of them, did receive final approval at the July 31st Rules Review Commission meeting, and 2 of them became effective August 1st. So we did another supplement to your collection of rules, and so there were 18 left, and all 18 of those are automatically subject to legislative review. So you already know it's going to take more time for those to finish the process. They are not eligible to be reviewed until the 2025 long session, so they're going to sit a bit. Sometime in the first quarter of the year would be the opportunity that they could become effective. So they will obviously have a delayed effective date. Now, I'm glad to provide any additional details or answer questions about those 18 rules. We will continue to monitor the status of those and keep you updated at your quarterly meetings until those have become resolved. So I'll pause there in case there are any questions along those lines.
Questions? I think we're good.
Okay, so why are we here today for rules? We're here to take action on 3 different subjects of rules, and those consist of the 24-25 package. The 3 subjects make up that package. So over the last year, the preparatory steps for this cycle were completed. If you think back to your February meeting, you selected your preferred management option and associated proposed language for rulemaking for two of the subjects. Those were the simplify pot marking requirements and false albacore management. And so then in May, you did the same thing, picking your preferred option, and that was for the Interstate Wildlife Violator Compact. The fiscal analyses for all three subjects have now been completed and approved by the Office of State Budget and Management. And so those three fiscal analyses are in your materials, and the rulemaking process is now ready to begin today. Again, there's a table of all the steps that are coming for this rule package, and your vote today would bring these 8 proposed rules out for public comment and public hearing. So that's what the vote is doing. The public comment period is scheduled to occur from October 1st through 5 p.m. December 2nd, and we do have an online public hearing scheduled for Wednesday, October 30th at 6 p.m. via WebEx, and we'll have a listening station in Morehead City at our Central District office. So these proposed rules would have an earliest effective date of May 1st, 2025, and I will summarize these subjects and the proposed rules prior to your action. The first of the 3 subjects was a request of this commission, and it's the pot marking requirements rule amendments. It's a single rule. And so proposed amendments would simplify pot marking requirements for commercial fishermen by requiring only one of 3 ways to mark pot buoys, not 2 ways. And these ways are, number 1, gear owner's current motorboat registration number, or 2, gear owner's U.S. vessel documentation name, or 3, gear owner's last name and initials. So right now, the current rule requires that the gear owner's last name and initials be identified on each buoy as a baseline. Then, if a vessel is used, the identification must also include either the gear owner's current motorboat registration number or the gear owner's U.S. vessel documentation name. There have been no problems with pot identification, and pot identification would be sufficient with a single identifier. So the proposed amendments would simplify the requirements and grant some relief to commercial fishermen that use pots in their commercial fishing operation. So the next subject was also a request of this commission, and that is a rule to manage false albacore. The proposed adoption of this rule would provide a mechanism to implement management measures to cap harvest when the false albacore fishery landings exceed a threshold of 200% of average landings of both sectors combined from 2018 through 2022. Harvest restrictions would be implemented if the threshold is exceeded as a means to prevent further expansion of the false albacore fisheries beyond the threshold. And currently, there are no rules in place for management of false albacore in North Carolina. There's no baseline stock assessment for false albacore and thus no biological basis for reducing harvest. The only mechanism to monitor false albacore is through the annual landings in North Carolina, and that's not a measure of sustainability of the stock. While there's no need to manage to meet sustainability requirements, the Commission is seeking proactive management of false albacore to limit expansion of new and existing fisheries. Management measures would include commercial trip limits, recreational bag limits, and recreational vessel limits. And these would be implemented by the Fishery Director's Proclamation Authority, but only with concurrence by this commission first. And so the final subject is the Interstate Wildlife Violator Compact rule adoptions. There are 6 rules. The Interstate Wildlife Violator Compact is a voluntary interstate agreement that provides participating states with a mechanism to participate in a reciprocal program to do primarily 2 things. The first is to promote compliance with statutes, laws, administrative rules, and regulations relating to management of wildlife resources in their respective states. And 2, provide for the fair and impartial treatment of wildlife violators operating within the participating states. And this is in recognition of the individual's right of due process and the sovereign status of a party state. So why am I talking to you about wildlife? Well, for the purposes of the Interstate Wildlife Violator Compact, wildlife is defined to include the marine and estuarine resources managed by the Marine Fisheries Commission and the Division of Marine Fisheries. So you have to adjust your usual filter on vocabulary, and in this instance, wildlife does mean fish. It means marine and estuarine fish. So North Carolina's participation in the Interstate Wildlife Violator Compact has been enacted into state law, and it must be implemented and enforced. Article 22B includes North Carolina General Statute 113-300.7, and this requires the Wildlife Resources Commission and the Marine Fisheries Commission to adopt rules necessary to carry out the purpose of Article 22B. The Wildlife Resources Commission has adopted its rules, and so now it's this commission's turn. All right, so that's the three subjects. Next steps for these rules. As I mentioned, this will include a public comment period and a public hearing. That's what you're voting on. You'll get those public comments at your February business meeting, and that is to inform your decision on the vote for final approval of the rules at that time in February. If approved, the rules would go to the Rules Review Commission for final approval in April of 2025, and again, the earliest effective date would be May 1st of 2025. One important detail that's a little different for these rules, 6 of the rules, the Wildlife Violator Compact, those rules, any offenses committed in North Carolina or any other compact state prior to July 1st of 2025 would not apply. So even if the rules become effective May 1st, the requirements of the rules won't come into play until July 1st, and that's a clean start with the fiscal year and the license year. And the division recommends that the commission vote on approval to begin the process today for these 8 rules. And I think that covers the bulk of it. I do want to note the vote today is on the proposed rule text and the OSBM approved fiscal notes, and that's per the Administrative Procedure Act. So you are voting on all of those elements. And again, these can be taken up together or individually, Mr. Chairman, as you see fit. I'm glad to address any questions other than the scheduled action. That concludes my report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions or comments? Commissioner Roller,
My only comment is, would you like these motions separately or all together?
all together.
I would like to make that motion.
Okay. Motion to accept notice of text on these 3 rules.
Second, Rader.
Second, Rader. Okay, let's get the, there we go. All right, further discussion. All right, Jesse, would you give us a roll call?
Commissioner Bethea?
Aye.
Commissioner Blanton? Commissioner Claus?
Aye.
Commissioner Corbett?
Yes.
Commissioner Gardner? Commissioner Hopgood? Commissioner Rader?
Aye.
Commissioner Roller?
Aye.
Chairman Bizzle?
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Every action item we've had this meeting has been unanimous, which is good, very good. Thank you, Catherine. Appreciate all your good work. You keep us between the ditches. Okay, Charlie Deaton, Submerged Aquatic Vegetation and North Carolina's Management Framework.
Alrighty, good morning. I'm Charlie Deaton, Coastal Habitat Protection Biologist in the Habitat and Enhancement section. And I'm here to provide you today with an update on the division's ongoing efforts to protect SAV habitat, with a focus today on the basics of SAV ecology and management. So this is the first of a few presentations you're going to be receiving from DMF's Habitat and Enhancement staff following the MFC's request at the May meeting for staff to develop more comprehensive management options for SAV protection. But before we get into things, I do want to get into just a little bit of background about how we got here. So historically, habitat management originating from this commission has been in a little bit of a piecemeal form, targeting one habitat, one commercial gear at a time. And typically that came out of FMPs. So today, this conversation started with Amendment 2 to the Shrimp FMP, which had an in-depth issue paper that proposed area closures for shrimp trawling to protect SAV from physical disturbance. And in Amendment 2, in addition to the Bogue Sound closure, DMF was directed to continue developing recommendations kind of along how we're going to protect SAV habitat. So staff presented those recommendations to you in February of this year, gathered public input from your advisory committees in the spring, and we got a lot of pushback. To put it nicely, members of the public noted that while protecting SAV habitat is important, This proposal would have singled out shrimpers and disproportionately impacted smaller boats, and that if we were serious about SAV protection, we needed to be addressing the serious issue of declining water quality and ensuring that our proposals are holistic and avoid singling out individual stakeholder groups. So listening to that feedback, staff proposed to you in May that we kind of step away from that proposal and instead develop options within the MFC's authority that will address SAV protection more broadly and holistically. So staff are currently working through documenting the extent of the MFC's authority on SAV protection and developing some potential options that are going to be in line with the motion passed at the May meeting, which is excerpted here on the screen. Staff aren't quite ready to bring that information for you or the Habitat and Water Quality Advisory Committee yet, though. So today what I'm doing is I'm just going to provide some context of the science of SAV habitat to provide some context for future action, going over why SAV is important, why and where we're losing it, and a high-level overview of how we, as the state of North Carolina, have managed impacts to SAV through the Coastal Habitat Protection Plan. And so at your upcoming meetings, Habitat Enhancement staff are going to bring you more information about exactly where your authority can go with regards to SAV protection and some potential actions that fall within that, along with input from the Habitat and Water Quality Advisory Committee. So we won't be asking for any motions today, but this is a prime opportunity for you to ask any questions that you have about SAV habitat and how it's been managed and protected so far. So real quick here, what we're going to be talking about today, there are two main parts to this presentation. The first is I'm going to be going through the ecology of SAV habitats, and that includes the range of physical and water quality threats to SAV and how much we've lost over the past few decades. In the second part, I'm going to be talking about how the Coastal Habitat Protection Plan coordinates protection for SAV habitats. And as a reminder, the SHIP was mandated by the Fisheries Reform Act to be approved on a 5-year cycle by the Environmental Management Commission, which manages water quality impacts, the Coastal Resources Commission, which manages coastal development, and yourselves. And again, you can think of this presentation as part one of this discussion. We'll be back to dive deeper into your potential management options at a future meeting. But first, I just want to start big picture here with some images of SAV beds, just so that we're all on the same page with what we're talking about here. So this photo and several of the following are all drone photos taken by Dr. Jesse Jarvis's lab at UNC Wilmington. These are SAV beds in the Topsail Sound area. So this orange area is roughly demarcating where the SAV habitat. It's those dark patches that are just below the water line. And it's common for SAV to be near other habitats like the salt marsh that's green in this photo and the oyster reefs that are that grayish brown color. So zooming in a little more, that's a roughly 18-foot skiff for scale. And this is an up-close view of an eelgrass bed at a very low tide. So those of you who fish the seagrass beds probably are very familiar with this view. And that's a biologist surveying it. That's a 1/2 meter by 1/2 meter quadrat, and that's kind of our go-to tool for measuring like percent cover and the chute density of the seagrass beds when we're out there surveying them. This is a view of a widgeon grass bed near Aurora. So this is a pretty common site in our state's lower to mid salinity estuaries, especially in the summertime. While the eelgrass that you've been seeing in the previous few pictures is only that close to the surface at a very low tide, widgeon grass likes to try to grow up to the surface because it's usually growing in darker water. So you're more likely to encounter it once it's growing up to the surface like that. This is just going underwater back to that Topsail Sound eelgrass bed. This is an unusually clear day, but this is what it looks like underwater. Here's another photo with a little more algal scuzz that's a little more common. And this is a mixed eelgrass and shoalgrass bed, some pinfish taking refuge in it. So now that I've gone over some of the, just make sure we're all on the same page, we know what it looks like, we're talking about the same thing. I'm just gonna go over some quick SAV biology basics. So when we're talking about SAV, we mean plants that are rooted into the sediment and continuously underwater, though sometimes extra low tides are gonna expose some species. In North Carolina, we have 3 high salinity seagrass species and another 11 species that grow in low salinity waters. And we use 10 parts per thousand salinity as the rough divider between where that high salinity and low salinity is. for SAV's perspective anyway. And just a quick note on terminology, you're going to hear me refer to SAV habitat, SAV beds, seagrass meadows. I'm all the same thing, at least for the purposes of this talk. It's all the same thing. So SAV does not include algae. Think about sea lettuce or codium, because those don't root into the sediment. And so it also doesn't include salt marshes, which are in the intertidal zone and are managed as coastal wetlands. So we're talking grasses underwater rooted into the sediment. And so this is a video. I'm going to talk a little bit about the value of SAV as a fish habitat. So this is a video of the fish eye view of a drum swimming through seagrass. So this was Krefel-funded research that UNC's Institute of Marine Sciences did. And before I started, in the top right, there's an inset video that's an overview of Middlemarsh near Beaufort. So you'll see that darker areas, which are a little hard to see on the screen right now, you'll see tracks going through there as the fish travels through, and then the main video is a recreation where they followed along that track with the camera. So for those of you who are a little sensitive to flashy motions, the next 30 seconds, feel free to look away because this is a little jerky. But so this is what they think of as kind of a foraging behavior of the red drum, going around and alternating between the sand flats and dipping into the edge of the seagrass beds here. And this is a clarity that's a little more common than some of those crystal clear photos that I showed you earlier. So all of our state-managed species, except oysters, have been documented to use SAV as a habitat, as have many interjurisdictionally managed species. SAV fills a bunch of different ecological roles as a fish habitat, and that includes refuge area, it includes spawning grounds, that's for spotted sea trout and bay scallops, nursery habitat, foraging grounds like you saw for the red drum there, and movement corridors. So the main takeaway here, there's not going to be a quiz on this, but the main takeaway is that the SAV is important in a lot of different ways for a lot of different species that are commercially and recreationally important. And if anybody wants any more info on this, we've summarized all this information in the 2021 CHIP, and if anybody has questions about any specific species, I'm happy to follow up later. And beyond just our managed species, SAV is home to far more small fish, crustacean, and shellfish species than I could possibly fit in here, which makes it home to a disproportionate share of the base of the food chain for our estuaries as well. So this is just a selection of the nearly 200 species of fish that UNC's Institute of Marine Science has caught in their ongoing seagrass trawl surveys. And these are only from the high salinity grass beds, so there are many more species that are up in the low salinity grass beds that aren't included within that 200 species number. And so just to go a little bit over some of the recent research that's been done in North Carolina's SAV beds, researchers have found that our seagrasses support 10 times more fish than mudflat habitats and 2 to 3 times more than marsh creeks. They've also found there's some ongoing research that is showing that high salinity seagrass is providing more than 10% of the economic value of NC's commercial fisheries just through the value of it as a nursery habitat for a few of the important species that use it. This is ongoing research. They're hoping to get to the recreational side of things soon, but this is some really interesting research just documenting how the additional production from these beds is important. And putting our SAV beds into a global context, we've had some comparative studies that have found that our seagrass meadows have the highest prey consumption rates in the entire northern hemisphere. That just means that our SAV has incredible value in supporting foraging fish and supporting those fish that are higher up the food chain. And beyond just fish habitat, there's a lot of other research that supports and documents how it provides other ecosystem services. That's water quality enhancement, sediment stabilization, carbon sequestration, and a bunch of other environmental benefits. So as valuable as SAV is as a habitat, it is somewhat finicky about where it'll grow. So I'm going to go over the basic requirements for SAV growth and then get a little bit into how it's distributed across the state. So there are two primary requirements for SAV growth. The first of which is light availability. Because they're plants, SAV does need enough light to make it through the water column to where it's growing to allow them to photosynthesize. And to speak in very general terms, that light requirement is about 15 to 25% of the light that's hitting the surface of the water column. And that varies by species as to exactly how much they need, but how much of that's getting through the water column is chiefly a mixture of water clarity and water depth. So with this average water clarity in our estuaries, SAV usually grows to a max of about 6 feet of water depth. But it does grow deeper than that in some places, down to like 7, 8 feet in areas that have clearer water. However, those deeper beds are the most vulnerable to being lost because any degradation to clarity will quickly extinguish whatever light that was getting down to them. So some species have evolved some tolerance for lower light, especially in the low salinity regions. Think of that widgeon grass that I showed you earlier that grows to the surface of the water column. But those species are still uncommon in more than 6 feet of water. The other primary requirement for SAV growth is some degree of physical stability. The exact components of that are kind of site-specific, but it includes a combination of lower wave energy, shallow depth, and stable sediments. Essentially, just a lack of regular physical disturbance. So SAV does have some ability to recover from physical disturbance, but that resilience to disturbance decreases in lower light situations or in areas where that physical disturbance is regularly repeated. And I include this as a side note in addition to those main two factors. Salinity and temperature are key requirements of individual SAV species for where exactly they'll live. SAV can grow in all of North Carolina's waters that have that combination of light availability and physical stability. But temperature and salinity drive which species will grow and at what times of year. And those environmental conditions, salinity and temperature, will change dramatically throughout the year and from year to year, which means that in some places, especially the smaller and patchier SAV beds, the SAV will disappear for a few months and then come back. And in areas where the growing conditions are less than optimal, that year-to-year variability means that SAV will regularly disappear or dramatically thin out for a year or two, and then it'll come back in another year or two. So, and this is an issue that we expect climate change to seriously exacerbate in the coming years, and we already are starting to see different species of seagrass transitioning as our waters warm. So talking about where our SAV is, we have reliable maps going back to 1981. And so this map that you're seeing on the screen, those of you who reviewed the 2021 CHIP, you've seen this many times already, but this is a map of all of the surveys we have between 1981 and 2021. And we take that as kind of where the SAV should be able to grow. So for the CHIP, DMF staff have been compiling and updating this map with all the available SAV surveys and adding more into it as we get more surveys completed. And so right now we're at a total of 18 separate surveys that are conducted in this 40-year time range. And we have a total of approximately 196,000 acres of SAV habitat that we've mapped statewide. And we think that's likely an underestimate given the difficulty of obtaining quality aerial imagery, especially in the darker waters up in the low salinity parts of the state. So, as I mentioned earlier, the extent is variable from year to year, and it responds quickly to annual fluctuations in the environment. This means that if an area has supported SAV in the past, it should generally still be able to support it today, as long as water clarity and physical stability have not permanently changed. So while some areas that previously supported SAV may have become too deep, such as like a dredged channel or near an inlet where the shoals have shifted, the bulk of the areas that we've mapped that had SAV represent either SAV that's here today or SAV that should be able to grow if we can restore either that water quality or physical disturbance that's affecting it. And so this is a zoom in of that SAV mosaic in the Cape Lookout and Harkers Island area. Again, this is all the SAV that's been mapped back 1981 to 2021. You'll notice most of it is on the backside of the banks here, and that's true of the majority of North Carolina's SAV habitat. It's on the back barrier shelf from Cape Lookout all the way north to Currituck. And this is what was here in the 2019 to 2020 survey. Unfortunately, the current extent is much smaller than the area that has been vegetated over the past 4 decades, and it's been continuously decreasing throughout our surveys. This is the most recent survey available for the Cape Lookout area, and you'll notice how much of the SAV in core sound and back sound has been lost, especially in those deeper waters adjacent to the back barrier. So, covering a little bit about what we know about SAV loss in the state. This is, again, just an overlay of those 2 images. So everywhere where you can see orange was mapped here as SAV at some point, but only the green was vegetated in the most recent survey. And there's a lot of caveats to include when it comes to talking about the amount of SAV that we have lost. So I'm just going to cover this at a real high level, and if you have questions, feel free to ask. But starting with the high salinity SAV loss, APNEP compared their first 2 statewide surveys that they conducted of the high salinity seagrasses and found a loss of roughly 1% per year, though it was a lot higher in some areas. I've been working through some analysis of APNEP's data and DMF's data, trying to look back at this long-term survey versus our most recent surveys. So over that 40-year period, we're also seeing roughly 1% loss per year. And in the low salinity regions of the state, APNEP's did some slightly different surveys there, so it's not fully comparable to what we're seeing in the high salinity parts of the state, but they found that same roughly 1% loss per year for more than 30 years. So now 1% per year might not sound like a lot, but once you add it up over time, it means that we've already lost roughly 40% of our known extent of SAV, and within the decade, if this continues, we will have lost more than 50% of the SAV habitat that we knew that we had. And to bring the mood down a little more here, we aren't just losing extent of SAV beds, but the quality of the SAV beds we have is also declining. In APNEP's mapping, they note if beds are like thick and continuous or if they're thin and patchy. And in these maps, APNEP analyzed that change there, and you'll see green here is continuous, yellow is patchy, and you'll notice that a lot of those continuous beds in this 6-year period transition to becoming more patchy, particularly along the deeper edge of the beds. And that patchiness is bad because not only will it reduce the fisheries production from the habitat, but once patchiness and fragmentation get bad enough, SAV loses its ability to stabilize the sediment, and that decreases the clarity of the water because the sediment gets resuspended, and that can kill off even more of the SAV. So getting into a little bit of the causes of that loss, the South Atlantic Council's 2014 SAV policy is one of the best out there for describing the major threats to SAV. And you'll notice that these line up with the primary requirements for SAV growth that I mentioned earlier. The first of those is light limitation, which is connected to runoff from land, either through particles and tannic water in that runoff or through phytoplankton growth from the nutrients that come from that. And it can also be connected to resuspension of sediments from the bottom of the estuary from waves, boats, and other bottom disturbances. The other major threat that they identify in the policy is mechanical damage. That can be from propeller damage, bottom disturbing fishing gear, and dredging and filling. These are all impacts that get worse when they occur more frequently or when water quality is also degraded, because that decreases the ability of the SAV to bounce back from those physical impacts. And that SAV policy is now more than 10 years old, and it included climate change as kind of a footnote to what was happening. But the science on the impacts of climate change has advanced dramatically in those 10 years. And I'm just going to briefly highlight some of the research on climate impacts on SAV habitats that research has been done here in North Carolina. And we have some pretty good evidence that climate change is already bringing more rain and bigger tropical storms to our state, and that drives more runoff to the estuaries, and that's going to drive a lot more nutrient delivery. We found that those high rainfall events have already doubled annual nutrient delivery when they happen, and that can lead to increased phytoplankton growth that lasts for weeks. And that has serious negative impacts to SAB because it can shade it out. Further, with rising temperatures, eelgrass, which is the foundation species of our high salinity beds, is expected to experience dramatic declines over the coming decades. Already the number of annual summer days that get hot enough to cause stress and mortality in those beds has nearly doubled since the 60s, going from 85 days a year to 156 days. So we're seeing a lot more heat, and I'll note that while we don't have published research on how sea level rise will impact SAV in our state, research in other states with comparable estuaries is suggesting that sea level rise is already contributing to the loss of those deeper water SAV beds, because as the water gets deeper, there's less light that makes it down to the bottom. So now that we've gotten through that thoroughly depressing section, I'm going to speak a little bit to how we've managed SAV to mitigate some of those impacts so far. Most of our efforts to protect SAV habitats have come through the CHIP, which is a DEQ plan led by DMF and mandated by the Fisheries Reform Act. The MFC, the CRC, and the EMC are all required to approve the CHIP, so I'm going to speak quickly to what each of those commissions has done so far. So the Environmental Management Commission, which oversees the Division of Water Resources, along with some other DEQ divisions, but Water Resources is the key one here for SAV. They govern impacts to water quality across the state. One of the EMC's key duties is designating water quality standards, and that sets limits on the amount of pollution allowed in our waterways. The EMC's chlorophyll and turbidity standards do offer some protection to SAV from the two major sources of light limitation. And areas that have been mapped with SAV, the EMC has designated as outstanding resource waters, which is a higher classification than most of our surface waters get, and it subjects them to additional requirements, such as more stringent stormwater standards for new developments. And I'm going to go a little more into depth here about water quality improvement for SAB, because that was a hot topic of discussion at previous meetings. So Division of Water Resources staff have led the Nutrient Criteria Development Process, or NCDP, with collaboration from other DEQ divisions, including DMF's Habitat staff. So because the EMC's chlorophyll and turbidity standards aren't enough to protect SAV from the light limitation that's been driving some of the loss, the 2021 CHIP placed a large emphasis on developing new standards and updating the current standards that are deficient to improve water quality to protect and restore SAV. And to address that, the NCDP team has developed a water clarity standard, as poor water clarity is what prevents light from reaching the SAV beds. And DWR staff are beginning the process of bringing those proposed standards to the EMC within the next year. There are a lot of potential pitfalls along the way, but if the approval process goes smoothly, that'll take approximately a year. And from there, it'll be until the 2030 biennial update to the 303D list, which is our list of impaired waters, to have enough data to assess whether or not those water bodies are impaired. And so if a water body receives an impairment listing on the 303D list, that triggers the need to develop a total maximum daily load, or TMDL. That TMDL development involves identifying the sources and the causes of that decreased water clarity. And once that TMDL has been developed, then on-the-ground restoration work would start after they've identified the causes and potential solutions for that. So it's a long process, but because of all the different steps, we're looking at roughly a decade before seeing any potential on-the-ground improvements that come out of this process, if the EMC approves the standard. So while it's not a short process, it's really important for preventing further SAV loss and further degradation of our water quality. But the timeline really highlights the need for our other rulemaking bodies that are involved here to take action in the near term, because we're still losing that 1% of our grass beds every year. And I should note with that timeline on the last slide that that's a rough approximate from DWR staff, and that has changed many times over the past couple years that I've been here, and it would not surprise me if it changes again. So take that as with a grain of salt. So moving on to the Coastal Resources Commission, They're responsible for rules and policies for coastal development, approving land use plans, and designating areas of environmental concern. Their role with SAV protection falls under that first category of permitting coastal development. The policy that the CRC and DCM apply is that development has to avoid significant adverse impacts to SAV habitat, and they use the MFC's definition of SAV habitat to guide their permitting. Additionally, DMF's Habitat Enhancement section has 2 permit reviewers on our staff, and they review all of the major permit applications that DCM receives and vet them for impacts to SAV and other habitats. And this is something that gets applied in both a broad sense in terms of denying, such as denying all new dredging through SAV, but it also gets used in more specific and nuanced ways. So, for instance, if someone puts in a permit for a dock that falls out of the standards for a general permit, it gets elevated to a major permit, which allows DMF's permit review staff to assess and recommend modifications to that permit to prevent negative impacts. Which is a pretty common thing, and one of the categories that they'll use is it inadequate water depth, and do we need to raise the dock, change it to from floating to a lift, that kind of modification. So anyway, my takeaway here is that DCM and DMF, we have a long history of working together on making sure that DCM's permitting process is protective of SAV. And making sure that these different permitting approaches have been worked out through the CHIP to encourage responsible development that protects SAV. And saving the best for last here, this commission has traditionally managed physical impacts to SAV beds through individual commercial fishing gear restrictions like shrimp trawl and shellfish dredge area restrictions, along with nursery area designations and shellfish rake size and weight limits. This has been kind of a piecemeal approach, like I mentioned earlier, that has resulted in a patchwork framework for protecting SAV. The areas highlighted on this map are a wide range of different rules, some of which only restrict to single gear, some of which only apply for part of the year. And further, some of these designations weren't designed specifically with SAV in mind, and are kind of a broader suite of protections that provide different levels of protection from bottom disturbing gear and navigational dredging. And I mentioned this briefly when I was discussing the CRC, but this commission also put into rule a definition of SAV habitat, which is what the CRC relies on, and what the EMC may refer to if they choose to implement the proposed clarity standard. So having that rule has been very important for having protections for our SAV habitat. And so, like I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, the goal with where we're going here is to take a more comprehensive approach to protecting SAV in North Carolina rather than the piecemeal management proposals that have been brought forward so far. And so while we don't have those management proposals for you today, as staff develop those, we're keeping an eye toward ensuring that the MFC's protections against physical disturbance of SAV beds are more holistic and integrated. And I'm just going to wrap things up with some final takeaways here. The first of which is that North Carolina's SAV habitat plays a major role in our state's fisheries. We're losing SAV, and we're likely to lose it faster. The EMC is what oversees water quality protections and is going to consider that water clarity standard next year. And if they do approve it, we're looking at roughly a decade before we start to see on-the-ground improvements from that. The CRC has authority over in-water development impacts to SAV, and the MFC has managed physical impacts via fishing gear restrictions. And above all, action to protect our SAV beds remains very urgent. And with that, I will take any questions.
Questions or comment? Commissioner Corbett.
So, once again, and I think I put the chip out when I was chairman, that was when we started it. But it seems, at the end there, you're talking about we need to look at commercial fishing and shrimp trawls and all that stuff. And so this last rain event we had, and I'm not going to name the counties or anything, but One county dumped 30,000 gallons of raw sewage in a creek, another one dumped 100,000 gallons of raw sewage in a creek, and another one dropped 80,000 gallons. And two of those counties I crab in, and those two creeks that I crab in, there's not a blade of grass left because of the sewage. And so we keep wanting to say that a shrimper's killing the grass, or Tom Roller going in there and, fishing for drum with his props killing the grass. And we keep picking on these guys that aren't, when Tom goes in there and goes through and his prop hits it, or my prop hits it crabbing, you go back 2 days, it's growed right back in 2 or 3 days. But, the culprit that we have is the roads that we're putting in that are dumping out into the creeks. Every one of those pumping stations is on the head of a creek, and it's got a valve in the back, and when it gets too bad because the water gets too high, they dump the raw sewage in, and there seems to be nothing being done about it. But it's easy to pick on the commercial and recreational fishermen for disturbing the bottom. And so once again, and I've heard it for 20 years now, there's really nothing we can do about it. But if we want to solve a lot of the major problems with this grass, we need to quit putting all this junk in the water that don't belong there. And that's the only thing I have to say about it.
Commissioner Roller.
Thank you for your presentation, Charlie. That was very thorough. I'm a waterman. I spend most of my time in Carteret County. I spend a lot of time on the grass flats. I've noticed a big change in the seagrass where I fish, and I've had a lot of discussions about that with the academic community. And my understanding is, as eelgrass is being stressed, it's being converted a little bit to shoal grass. Is that true? And is that something we track and look at?
Yeah, so APNEP does have long-running surveys of where they have the same stations in the grass where they've monitored the species composition over time. Last I'd heard, they were working on a report on that, and I don't know what the status of that is, but the general perception, and I think we've probably talked to several of the same academics, is that yes, as the water gets warmer, the eelgrass is struggling, but the shoal grass is having some degree of success. So you are seeing a lot more shoal grass, and you're seeing a lot less of the beds that are just eelgrass. Most of the eelgrass beds are now mixed eelgrass and shoal grass, at least the ones that I encounter.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I learned, literally, I've been watching the dividing line under the areas I like to fish and back sound move a few hundred yards every year. And what's interesting to me is that, eelgrass is thicker throughout the course of the year, but shoalgrass
Right.
dies back. And I was just curious, if we're looking at that and looking at how that changes the composition of the fish or whatever that needs to use that habitat, because it's very different over the course of the year.
Yeah, I'm not aware of anyone who specifically tried to connect that change in grass composition to fish species composition, but it is a really interesting question to say, you're right, there's species that seem to be attracted to the eelgrass more, and what's going to happen as that changes is a really important question.
Commissioner Rader.
Thanks, Chairman. That was really great, Charlie. Thanks very much. I really appreciate the foundation for us to think through different options to go forward from here ourselves under our responsibility and commitment to the people of North Carolina, but then also working collaboratively with the other commissions that share that responsibility. So I do want to reinforce two things, both of which you said. One is that under the current version of the CHIP, which I think you've all, I think I can probably do you one better on that, because I actually wrote that part of the law that went into the Marine Fisheries Reform Act with an unnamed attorney who was working in the department at the time. But in any event, this time around, the Coastal Habitat Protection Plan, of course, identifies the full portfolio of habitats that all of our marine and estuarine resources organisms need to fulfill their life history. So it goes through, if you haven't actually flipped through it, it's well worth doing. But everyone agreed, the most recent approval by the three commissions, that this need was primary, was one of the most important things that we could do together to begin setting a solid foundation for the future of North Carolina's marine and estuarine resources. So that's a commitment that all three commissions made at that time. Obviously, politics stands to play, but that's a pretty important identification. The second thing is that what happens here in terms of identifying places that are most important to our resources cascades in the way that Charlie described into the rules and investments for priority remediation from all those other commissions under their aegis, the actions that they can take, and beyond. So I'd mention as well that the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council used the work that we had all done together to identify all SAV habitat, meaning where there are beds and where there are not today beds, but could be or should be, as not only federal essential fish habitat, which is deserving of protection, but the highest category of essential fish habitat, which are habitat areas of particular concern, or HAPCs. And the reason that I mention that is because there is an additional set of duties and opportunities hidden in the federal laws that we don't always take advantage of. Because every federal permit, expenditure, et cetera, action, is the language that the law uses, needs to be consistent with protection of essential fish habitat, and most especially habitat areas of particular concern. Now, that may sound arcane, except that the entire coastal zone program in North Carolina is a delegated federal action. The entire water quality protection program in North Carolina is a delegated federal action. Even things like dam permits are federal actions. Every Corps of Engineers permit is a federal action, et cetera, et cetera. So even when it looks like a state permit or something, that creates access against actions that threaten this stuff, including, I will say, the non-discharge permits for those lift stations that occur in those sewage collection and treatment systems all over the coast. Although identifying the nature of the risk and the opportunity for improvement, and then fighting it through the political processes that inevitably follow, create a pathway to a solution for those other things. I think the most important thing is that we probably uniquely now, under the aegis of the CHIP, have an opportunity to bring those solutions together, and where we don't know quite enough now to know exactly what they are, to focus research money coming from state and federal and non-public sources onto those key remaining questions. A lot of that's identified already in the CHIP, but as our knowledge evolves under Charlie and the staff's partnership with others, including academics, we can focus that, including on user dynamics and ways to moderate some of these challenges. So I'm not going to preach, except to say that I think this is there's a lot of reasons to say we can't do everything that needs to be done, but there's also a lot of reasons for us to take a leadership role and taking the right steps now to get towards that better future. And I'll just have to say that in the past, this commission, MFC, has been the leader that identified the key waters, that cascaded into designations of outstanding resource waters by the Environmental Management Commission, and that cascading like primary nursery and secondary nursery and special nursery area designations that then cascaded similarly into designations of areas of environmental concern by the CRC, and therefore additional protection, and a lot of that starts here. So I really think that as we hear more from you and the staff, Charlie, I would really appreciate us to be putting our thinking hats on about what those options might be, recognizing regulatory and non-regulatory opportunities to do a better job than we've been able to so far. So, but anyway, thank you very much.
Commissioner Gardner.
Charlie, could you speak a little bit about the water quality standard, what characteristics are going to be looked for, how that's going to, how that's going to work?
Yeah, so the proposed standard is water clarity. So what they'll do is they have, to assess it, light meters. And so they'll stick one at the surface of the water and one underwater. And we have research that dictates, so we know for the low salinity species, it's roughly 13% of the light that's at the surface that needs to hit the bottom, and for the high salinity, 22%. And, I bracketed that in this as something like 15 to 25%. But anyway, they're going to measure is 25% of that light making it down to where the grass is growing. And once that data is collected, then they'll be able to say, okay, yes, we have enough light reaching the bottom in this water body, but not in this water body. And then they'll go look at a watershed scale and say, okay, now that we've assessed that there's not enough percent of the light reaching the bottom, then they'll start to look at the causes. Is this because we have a high rate of sewer failures here? Is it because we have a lot of farmland that we've got a lot of nutrient runoff from? That sort of thing.
Is this something that can be done by citizen scientists? Is this something that could be turned into a
Absolutely.
kit?
We've had those discussions with Division of Water Resources. We actually expect to have some of DMF's technicians assist with a lot of this sampling because Water Resources doesn't have a lot of stations that they monitor in the estuaries. So it sounds like Water Resources has the money to purchase the equipment for us to use, and we can kind of tag along. We've had some discussions with them already about how we might do that. And I believe the plan was for our recreational water quality monitoring program to assist with some preliminary sampling just to see what that's going to look like this year. But yes, we've also discussed having citizen science groups, the river keepers, folks like that, being able to train them to collect the data to the standard that Division of Water Resources needs to assess it. Yeah.
Anybody else? Commissioner Hobgood.
You mentioned climate change and temperature that threatens or makes SAV vulnerable, or threatens SAV or makes it vulnerable. And if we were to adopt closures, and the reason I'm asking these questions, what is that temperature range? Because if we were to adopt closures, would it make more sense for those closures to be seasonal around those threatening temperature ranges?
I can't say that's something I'd given consideration to, but it is, at first glance, that is a reasonable consideration you can include. And specifically, when I talk about SAV being temperature stressed, it's the eelgrass specifically. And so we're already talking about one region of the state and not the entire state where that temperature stress is a problem.
What is that temperature range, or how high does temperature need to get?
The number that gets thrown out is 30 Celsius, which in Fahrenheit is somewhere in the mid to upper 80s, like 86, 87. But there's been some new research coming out that seems to suggest that in North Carolina, as it gets hotter, eelgrass has some ability to adapt. So obviously the water temperature in a lot of places gets into the upper 80s all the time. But we still have eelgrass that persists throughout the year in parts of the state. So it's not a cut and dry, water temperature hits this, grass dies. But we can kind of bracket it. I think the research I put in there earlier, I forget what slide it was, but talked about the number of stressful days. So you can kind of think about it in terms of at least days that are threatening stress, and so we're around 156 days, I think was the average that they reported.
Anybody else? Yes, sir. Commissioner
Just a
Rader.
quick response to that. I think about this as analogous to corals. I think I've heard about coral bleaching and coral death and water temperatures causing bleaching events and then death and stuff like that. But what has been found, now that a lot of money's been spent on understanding that, is that the genetics create some pathways to success you might not think about within a species, and then among species or potential contributors to the community there, seagrasses, or for that matter, lower salinity SAVs or corals, that different species in different genetic groups, clones if you will, are more susceptible or less. And so there's actually ways to sort of help that along. If one of our jobs was to keep habitats of the type that the fishes and other animals need, then we could think about different novel, maybe out of the box ways to promote those. So planting SAV, planting marsh grasses, people know a lot about those kinds of things and what makes them work and not work in terms of suitable habitats. But then if you add to that the notion of resistant genotypes or resistant species, recognizing the water might be getting deeper and warmer as things change, you could actually build a longer-term plan to deal with those threats. So I don't think it's a light switch question, but maybe an intellectual box that we need to get out of a little bit.
Commissioner Colossus.
Yes, I was wondering, we talked about the controllable ways to minimize the loss and the uncontrollable, being like ocean rise and warmer water. In your opinion, what percentage of the decrease is attributable to uncontrollable items versus man-made controllable in this loss scenario? And can the uncontrollable be overcome sufficiently enough, in your opinion, to stop the decrease or even reverse the decrease or cause it to increase from where it's at?
Sure. So I believe Commissioner Bethay put a similar question to Andy in last time she was up before the commission in terms of what % of this is water quality versus what % is physical disturbance. And so after that, I went and looked through the literature, and unfortunately, there's not a good answer to this. I think if you ask different seagrass scientists, you would get a different estimate of, well, it's this % water quality, this % physical disturbance, and this % climate change. And I think you would get different answers from just about everyone you asked. So I don't want to get up here and throw numbers out. But it's not all doom and gloom, right? So there are, for better or worse, as sea level rises, that means that there's more land that's going to be underwater and more potential SAV habitat in those areas. As temperature rises, we're going to be losing some eelgrass from lower parts of the state, but there's some consideration, like Commissioner Roller mentioned earlier, that the shoal grass has the potential to expand. So it's one of those. It's important to take the actions that are within our control that we can manage here, and it's important for every commission, every body that has the ability to take action here to do their part. So I know that's not really the most satisfying answer I could have given you, but I think that's about as much as I can confidently say.
Okay. Commissioner Blanton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to be brief. And Charlie, that was probably one of the better presentations on SAV and some of the issues around it, biology, all I've ever seen. So appreciate that. We could talk about this ad nauseum, and it's probably the most important thing out there to talk about is the living habitat, because seagrass is no different than any of the fishes we manage. It's just as important. It's probably more important than that. Managing for the actual fish is managing the actual habitat. And I know no one more intimately involved at what's going on out there than a waterman of any stature. And the more time you spend out there, the more you get to see really what happens after rainfall events, after prolonged periods of drought. There's so many scenarios that come forth out there that the general public and those that are just onlookers have no clue. To me, the biggest problem that lies is not particularly protecting the habitat from the fisher. It's protecting the habitat from those on land. I have video of a pumping station that has no one around, that is just pumping raw sewage out of the ground. I'm walking around videoing. I call the number on the sign on the door. It's a third party that's not even in the state of North Carolina handling that phone call. I call, I speak with this person, they're more worried about what my name is than what's going on. So and ultimately in that situation, I called the city immediately and had somebody go and address this. But how many scenarios, hundreds, thousands, that happen daily? And so we have to do much better at looking at what's really going on the land that's influencing our waterways. You know, I say this all the time. The guys building bulkheads, hey, look, hardworking people, but their barges get bigger every year. Their equipment gets bigger every year. They are getting faster at putting in bulkheads every year because they're in the business to make money. And the faster they can build these things, you know, the more money they can make. And that's capitalism. But it's our job, as well as the other commissions, the general assemblies, and even down to the county commissioners and the city planners, the county planners, and all the people involved in understanding what it is that they're approving, the developments, the this, the that. There's county commissioners approving developments, and they do not have the infrastructure to even handle the capacities that they're asking of them. And so this is a huge problem that's well beyond the Marine Fisheries Commission. And so I just wanted to say that on record and be as brief as possible, because I have a tendency of going off on things like this, but
No, you don't.
I'm telling you, I have a passion for all of this stuff. I want to see this go on for generations to come. The waterways become healthy again and all the things. And I believe everybody sitting in this room wants the same exact thing. But we have to do better at conversations with all these people that we run into, the planners, the other commissioners, the legislators, the elected officials, and try to help them understand that our waterway is not just a drive-by scenic view that you say, yeah, that's beautiful. But it's a living and breathing organism that makes up a huge part of the state of North Carolina. Yeah. I mean, we have one of the best coastlines, in my opinion, in the country. And so it hurts my feelings, and it hurts me to go out there every day and see what happens when we have huge rainfall events and the runoff is just makes the water look like a cup of coffee that's been creamed. And, I mean, it goes in the blink of an eye, can change. And so, I'd love to see the state take better action at what goes on in land use planning and what we do with all of that stuff, and to try to help these waterways out the best that we can. And, I'm totally on board with anything and everything we can do to try to help that cause, and to hopefully mitigate any pressures to the user groups out there that may impact seagrass, but mostly minimally, because they understand that the grass is the most important thing out there too, and they don't want to disturb it, and they don't want to trawl through it, and they don't want to, disturb it no more than they have to, because it's a burden to them, to fisher. So anyway, thank you for my time, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Charlie, for the presentation. That was great. And
Can I just add something to that?
Yes, Commissioner Gardner.
Very quickly.
Yes.
When we were discussing this with the SAV shrimp trawl interaction, some people did some really, really good homework and basically lined up AppNet satellite maps of certain areas around Harkers Island, the Marshallburg area, that had not been shrimped in a very long period of time. And through the course of this basically time-lapsed satellite mapping, you could see the grasses disappear, and as you were seeing docks being added to an area. And you could understand pinch points, you could understand water flow changes. It was right there in black and white. It wasn't in theory, it was right there. And all you have to do is go to the AppNet website and see for yourself. Thank you.
Anything else from Commissioner Bethea?
Thank you, Chair. And thanks for putting that together. I was really looking forward to seeing that. I've just got a couple questions. One, does seagrass, does SAV provide dissolved oxygen at all?
I suppose it could. It's a plant, it's photosynthesizing and taking in carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Also, in the oyster industry, we had a delay in leasing approval because I think we were waiting on SAV layers to be put out there or published. And the way I understand it is we had a bumper year of SAV the last, from 2022 on. Can you comment on that? Did we have a bumper year? Is it, because the maps seem like it's going away, but has it started increasing since then?
So when people say bumper year for SAV, usually what they're referring to is they'll notice SAV growth in one particular area where they're on the water a lot. And so around that time period, I don't remember what year it was, but there were folks talking about Back Sound having a good year for SAV growth. I don't know quantitatively what that means, but I have heard something like that. But the trend, like I said, like you have good years for SAV, you have bad years for SAV. The overall trend is in the downward direction still, pretty much everywhere across the state.
And do we know if that's common, like, oh, sorry, go ahead, man.
Hear me? Okay. I just wanted to highlight one thing about SAV
Thanks,
and
Steve.
leases is that we have a law that says you can't rule out leases or change leases due to SAV from the state's view. So all of the SAV protections over shellfish leasing is through the Army Corps, and they apply the historical mosaic, which is the full extent, that 1981 forward. So that whole map does not show what Charlie showed is the removal or loss of that SAV. It's anywhere that SAV has been and could come back. So that's something that the Corps does that we guide on, but we can't apply directly because we have a law against it. I just want to clarify that for you.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. I didn't do a good job with the words on that. And to that kind of same thing, when it's historical SAV, are we talking that we have like roots there, or is it like this is 6 feet of water or less, and so theoretically it could grow there? What's considered like the historical SAV?
So I'll jump in here. Those maps that I showed where we have that composite going back, if it had SAV and it is still deep enough, then we assume that the SAV has the potential to come back there. In terms of the leasing process, Zach can speak more specifically to that, but our overall approach is that the MFC's definition of SAV habitat does include kind of a 10-year limit going back into time. So it has to have been documented to meet the MFC definition, has to have been documented to have SAV within the past 10 years if the SAV is not presently there.
And it can be documented through like LiDAR, radar, or physical?
There's not a specific designation of how to document it. What goes into the mapping efforts that you'll see, that 1981 to 2021 mosaic, that all is a pretty standardized aerial photo survey where they fly over, take pictures of it, and then someone goes behind in a computer and draws out the SAV beds.
Cool. So it was a visual, like visually confirmed.
Yes.
That's pretty remarkable. And you guys know I like to talk about SAV, so I'll just keep rolling. We talked about prop strikes. And then I was wondering with what Commissioner Blanton said, what about in regards to septic? Is that, I don't really have a question about it, I guess. It seems like septic flooding is similar to sewage pumping, and so it's not necessarily, it's more of a maybe development aspect than it is somebody not doing their job or a county not doing their job. Do you think septic would also impact it?
For sure, yeah. So there's some thought, and I don't know about, I haven't read the papers, but I've heard research, people talk about in places like down east where the water table is so high that there's thought that a lot of the septic systems in those areas are not adequately treating what's going into them, and so you're getting a lot of discharge directly to the estuary. And it's certainly a large problem. I don't know if, again, one of those, how big is it exactly? I don't know that we've quantified that, but it is a considerable issue.
Thanks. And then my last thing is kind of an overall thing about SAV. We had some stakeholders reach out, especially during the shrimping thing, and they were wanting to know how much SAV is kind of our goal. Is it to get back to the historic levels? Is it to get close? And I think they wanted to know that because, if the whole state looks like 1980 historic levels, I don't know if people are going to be able to get docks or, Commissioner Roller would be able to fish, and it seems like anything under 6 feet of water had seagrass. So have we thought about what it's going to be like if we do achieve this and we have seagrass in all water that's under or 6 feet and under?
Yeah, so with the 2021 CHIP, part of that was setting a goal of reaching the known historic extent as a net, 191,000 acres was the goal of, we want to have this much seagrass in the state. I think that's aspirational. Getting there is not in the near future. So in terms of people thinking through exactly what that looks like, I don't know that anyone's gone out and mapped like, yeah, these are exactly where it's going to be, because we're going to have a lot of sea level rise between now and then. We're going to have a lot of change in environmental conditions. So I know that's not the most satisfying answer to your question, but yeah.
Two quick things. I think the way to think about this and other related questions is not towards restoring what used to be, but putting in place and protecting what can be, taking into account the conditions that are going to occur in the future. In other words, if people think about marsh migration many times, and the problem with bulkheads intercepting marsh migration as sea level rises, well, seagrass is the same way. Where in the future will the habitat conditions be good enough, if we do our jobs, to sustain and support those kinds of habitats? I think in this case, it'll be within the footprint mostly of historical seagrass habitat, meaning vegetated or not, but only because, but the same upslope migration factors with sea level rise and storm intensity changes will also occur. So I think we should be thinking about what we should be managing towards in the future. A quick note about septic tanks and, for that matter, sewage overflows is that we haven't talked much about nutrients yet, except as an indirect stimulator of algal growth that impairs water clarity. But in addition to that, most seagrasses are built to exist in very ultra-low nutrient circumstances and to actually scavenge actively nitrogen, particularly out of a low nitrogen circumstance. And so when you go from that into a high nitrogen circumstance from either one, and remember that most septic systems, in fact, most sewage systems actually aren't built to eliminate nitrogen. Mostly it is still a dissolved form that ends up in the groundwater and moving through the shallow groundwater, dissolved into surface waters. When you start monkeying around with those systems and delivering too much nitrogen, some species are actually directly sensitive to nitrogen, almost as a poison. There's some controversy about that. Others are potentially affected both by water clarity, but also by the other things that grow on their surfaces when nutrients are there in abundance, other plants and things that grow on the surfaces. So managing excessive nitrogen particularly in all those coastal creeks is really important to factor in, and will be something we have to think about in terms of actually protecting a water clarity standard, if that's clear. But as we move forward in designating the areas that then become outstanding resource waters and other designations because of their SAV habitat presence, then the protective mechanisms that are necessary and to put regulations in place at landscape scales then can address all these things if we can find the political way to do it.
Commissioner Roller.
Thank you, Chair. Comment here, and Charlie, you can address this if you think I'm off base or you think there's something you can add, but, you know, we seem to sometimes talk about seagrass in terms of like direct effects, like, no, I'm not trawling on it. No, I'm not running across it, hitting with my prop. We have to remember it's also about sedimentation. And something that I notice, and I'm sure many of you notice here, as our coastal communities develop, there's a lot more boating effort, right? There's also a lot more development. What does that mean? There's all areas that we used to remember the water used to be clear. And now as boat weight gets concentrated, maybe it bounces off the shoreline, those are areas now that the water is routinely muddy, routinely full of sediment. And also as we develop, we'll see lots built, neighborhoods built, and that kind of breaks the windbreak. And there's areas that I used to fish that now are no longer protected. They always seem muddy and they always seem full of sediment, and there's no more seagrass there anymore. And so I was just curious if that's something we look at, like as development goes and sediment, it seems to be like more concentrated in certain areas with human activity. I know it's kind of a disjointed question, but it's something that, you know, it impacts me not just on seagrass, but just on general water quality, or water clarity.
Sure. So there was, in the 2016 CHIP, one of the priorities was looking at sedimentation in tidal creeks and trying to connect that to land use change. I actually worked on a little bit of that research when I was working on my master's degree at UNC. And there are definitely connections between land use change and the amount of sediment that's going into our creeks. Exactly how much seems to be fairly variable and kind of difficult to predict, but there is a general understanding that, yes, we are receiving a lot more sediment coming into our waterways, especially directly along the coast. And in terms of, I don't know that there have been any attempts to link that to the suspended sediment concentrations as it pertains to whether that's going to affect, whether and how that's going to affect SAV. We know more suspended sediment is bad, but I don't know that we've taken that leap from the research that I was participating in anyway, was looking at sedimentation, like accumulating on the bottom. I don't know that we've attempted to connect that to what's up in the water column and affecting the seagrass beds, if that answers your question.
Anybody else?
Do you mind if I finish up, Commissioner?
Yes.
Or Chairman, sorry. And also, that's actually great, kind of into what I was going to say, is do we know how long it takes for the seagrass to die in a really like turbid environment or like a zero light environment?
I will have to get back to you on that. I believe there is research there. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, though.
Thanks, and I really appreciate you putting that together, too.
Absolutely.
Anybody else? I do have an observation that will really support what you've talked about today. I have a place over on Bogue Sound almost directly across from the division office. And those piers there are 400 feet long. And they're like this. And so nobody can get between the piers really to fish. On my left, on the west side, there is a big space there. But between the piers and the water this year has been gin clear most all the time. Of course, we do have turbidity during storms. But the seagrass there is doing very well because there's nobody been on it and the water's been clear. But on the west side, the seagrass is not as healthy because people have been able to get in there to fish, both recreationally and commercially. And so I just want to say, you know, what you have commented on has been, I agree with it 100%.
Thank you.
Anything else? Yeah. Appreciate your presentation, and thank you very much. Keep up the good work. I just hate it's going to take a decade to get to where we need to be.
I'm right there with you. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay, our next presentation, multi-species tagging program. Amy needs about 5 minutes to get set up, so we'll go ahead and let you do your thing. We'll take just a really short break, okay? get you on the road shortly.
If they have to prove and fund an offset, they're in big trouble. It costs a ton of money to do that. Go find a wetland, go find a habitat pack, SAB pack. There are aggregate.
Okay. Jesse, you have something you want to share with us, please, sir?
Yeah, I just wanted to say this next presentation that we're going to give, it's the last presentation we have for this meeting, and we want to try something a little bit different than we have in the past. This one might be a little bit more interactive than a lot of the presentations that the commission is used to seeing. We're hoping that this makes it a little bit more engaging and a little bit fun. It's a good way to kind of close out the meeting. That's all I have.
All right.
No pressure, right?
No pressure at all, Amy. You know, this reminds me of whenever a high school player is going to pick what team he's going to go to. So please go ahead, Amy.
Well, good morning, commissioners, chairman. Good morning to the folks in the room and also watching online. My name is Amy Staples. I am the tagging biologist for the North Carolina Division of Marine Fisheries Multi-Species Tagging Program. And I'm here today to talk to you about some amazing opportunities that we have, specifically with some of our citizen science. I've been with the division since 2015, and I've been located at the Washington Regional Office during that period of time. My counterpart and colleague Amanda Masick spoke with you yesterday about some of the great opportunities that we have to participate in our programs, from the citation program all the way to the carcass collection program. So here's another one that we want to showcase to you. And so there's a bet going on behind me with staff that if I could stay seated in this chair while giving a presentation, so we'll see what happens. So let's just do it. So let's talk about tagging into citizen science. That's what we're here today to talk about. So what is citizen science? Citizen science is the collection and analysis of data relating to the natural world by members of the general public, typically as part of a collaborative project with professional scientists. That's the straight up dictionary definition right there. Great, but what I like is the National Park Service definition. Citizen science is science for everyone, and that's what the tagging program is getting folks involved with science while we're collecting great data. I want you to look at the slides. I'll be referring to both, so sorry if I'm referring to one and you're on the other side of the room and vice versa. But the pictures that you see in this presentation here today, these are pictures from anglers. They have been turned in to us through our hashtag Tagging Tuesday social media post. We want to see pictures of anglers catching their tagged fish. This is a great way for us to see what's happening out there. So some of these pictures, like I said, that you'll see in the presentation mostly came from our anglers who are catching fish, staff members tagging fish, volunteers as well. So what is the North Carolina Tagging Program? Well, the current rendition of that is the NCDMF Multi-Species Tagging Program and began in 2014. Now, the Division of Marine Fisheries has been tagging fish long before that. We started in the 1970s with striped bass. 1980s, we added red drum. 1990s, we added southern flounder, and so on and so forth. We have been tagging many, many fish species during that time, whether it was Spanish mackerel, whether it was striped mullet. We've tagged blue crab, we've tagged brown shrimp. If it's out there, we can tag it. So, but this rendition that we started in 2014 was really there to standardize all these different research collection programs. We had different researchers, they were collecting data in different ways. The data was housed in kind of different ways as well. So what this did, the biologists came together, staff came together and said, let's house this under one program. That way, protocols are standardized. And then as we need to add more species to the program, we've got a framework, a groundwork to already do that, and then we can have dedicated staff. As you see me up here, I'm one of those dedicated staff members now. This is funded through the Coastal Recreational Fishing License Fund. So if you bought a fishing license, thank you, you're helping with this research. So, there we go. Tagging studies play a vital role in assessing fish populations by providing information to us and data. Commissioners, what is that? What is the data that it's providing? What is it helping us get it at? I know some of y'all have sat through my talk before. Come on. Do I need to? Usually I incentivize with a hat. If you want a hat, now's your time to answer. What does tagging studies do? Oh, y'all are being so shy on me. Y'all don't
Show the
usually
proper
shy.
growth and
Fish
help
move-
Yeah,
fish
fish and where they move.
I'm giving you opportunities to talk right now.
Fish movement patterns and stock structure.
There we go. Awesome. There we go. So yes, we're talking about migration patterns. Where do fish move? Are they staying right here in North Carolina, or are they moving off our coast to other states? What are they doing? We're looking at habitat use. We were just talking about SAV with Charlie. Habitat use. They're being captured here. They're being recaptured here. That habitat use is very, very important. Is that an oyster bed? Is that SAV habitat? What is it that's putting that fish right there? And is that an area that we need to protect? So that's really, really important for us to look at. Stock delineation. There we go. That was mentioned. What is the stock? Is it a North Carolina stock? Is it a Virginia, North Carolina stock? Is it an East Coast stock? What is that stock? Population structure. Young fish, old fish. We saw some presentations yesterday about that. Growth rates. From the point that we captured that fish and tagged it to the point where we recaptured it, what was that growth? And with that and the aging lab, that data combined together, we can look at those things. And then mortality rates, looking at...
Fish sex.
Yes, correct. Please, ad lib, it's great. So, and mortality rates, natural and fishing mortality. All right, so what fish do we tag? Go for it, tell me.
Speckled trout, red drum, flounder, and cobia.
Striped bass, red drum, southern flounder, spotted sea trout, and cobia. Great job. I'm texting to see if anybody actually went out to the booths yesterday and checked out the booths, so they're all there. As you can see, these are the 5 species that we tag. We also tag Atlantic sturgeon. It's more so part of our endangered species monitoring, so I didn't include that here, but we do have that species as well that we tag in partnership with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. But we've been talking about these 5 species since I started with the division. These are highly important species for recreational and commercial purposes. So why are these species the ones that we're tagging? Just because of that. They were identified in the fishery management plans that there were research needs that we needed to address and data gaps that we needed to address, and hence why they were added to the tagging program. And like I said, we have a framework to add more species, and that's why we put it in place. So what tagging techniques do we use? Well, one of the techniques is satellite tagging. Now, satellite, I've labeled these from most expensive to least expensive. That's why they're in this order. So most expensive is satellite tagging. You're looking at $1,000+ per tag. But satellite tagging helps us get at some of those big research questions like offshore movements of species and where those spawning grounds are. We've done satellite tagging with our southern flounder recently, and we're moving forward this year with a red drum satellite tagging project to do just that. Then we have acoustic tagging. So with acoustic tagging, generally it's an acoustic tag that is internally implanted into a fish. And once you've let that fish go, it's going to ping to this. This is an acoustic receiver. We have over 120 of these deployed in our coastal rivers, inlets, and waterways. And so as a fish that has an acoustic transmitter passes by this receiver, it pings to it, identifying that tag number and timestamp and location, so we can track fish movements in and out. Next, we have pit tags. Does anybody have pets? Yes, yes. Have y'all had y'all's pets microchipped? There you go. That's what a pit tag is. A pit tag is a passive integrated transponder, and what that does is we put it in the fish. It doesn't transmit or anything like that, but if that fish is recaptured, staff can actually scan it with a pit tag scanner and then pick up that tag number. And it helps us look at some of the tracking because we usually have another type of tag in it, so it helps us look at retention rates. But we use those. They're very, very tiny. And then the most common one that we use is our conventional tags. It's the tags that most people see out in the public, the streamer tags that are external to the body. What tagging methodology do we use to tag these fish? So you saw the tag types, but the tagging methodology is pretty simple. We capture the fish, we mark the fish with some type of tag, we release the fish. We want that fish to be released healthy and lively. We don't want it to be dead because we want it to be recaptured again. So we want to make sure we're ensuring that that fish stays as healthy as possible through the tagging process. And then hopefully, at some point, someone's going to recapture that fish. Whether it's an angler, whether it's another research group, whether it's one of our sampling programs, we hope to see that fish later in the future. So how can citizen science play a role in tagging research in our tagging program? Well, there's two ways. Through those processes, you can either become a volunteer tagger and help us mark those fish, or you can just go out there, go fishing, whether recreational or commercial. If you catch one of our tagged fish, turn that in and report it to us. So let's talk about that recapture and the methodology for that. So what to do if you catch a tagged fish. We have those cards out there. It says catch, cut, report. 3 simple things that we want you to remember. If you catch a tagged fish, cut off the tag and report the tag to the 1-800 number that's located on the tag. That 1-800 number gets you straight to Miss Debbie right over there. Miss Debbie will answer, she'll take your call. Or you can use that QR code that I have on the screen, or go to our website and you can turn it in online. Some people don't want to talk to people, I get it. So just turn it in online, it's right there. Now, I know there's always questions about this slide. Cutting off the tag. The questions that are going to come up, and I've heard it every fishing club I've ever gone to. Amy, why do you cut that tag? Don't you want that another angler to catch that fish? Isn't it better to have more data, that fish being recaptured and recaptured? Well, kind of got 4 points to talk about here. Just because you cut off the tag doesn't mean that tag can't get recaptured again. In the case of our internal anchor tags, if you cut off the streamer, that internal anchor is actually still in the fish. And say it's a spotted sea trout, and you let that fish go, and it gets harvested later, and an angler fillets open that fish and finds that nub of the tag, the anchor, they can report it again. So we've got some double tracking going on. We also, like I said, with pit tags, we can actually, if we have like in our striped bass case in the Cape Fear River, we have normal conventional tags with pit tags. So if an angler cuts that tag off, staff can still potentially track that fish with that pit tag inside. So we've got little scientific ways of tracking fish in different ways, not just that first recapture. Why do you need to cut off the tag? Well, if it's a red tag, does anybody know what red tags mean? $100, exactly. Everybody wants $100. It pays to go fishing, y'all. So if you want that $100, you need to cut off that red tag and send it in and mail it to us because we need to verify that tag. We need it mailed in. Do you know why? Because people like double dipping. So we want that tag in hand, yes.
So it's my understanding is like, the methodology in tagging versus just a basic reward and the $100 tag is that that's an amount that people will always put it in because they're not, because a lot of people will forget to do the yellow tag or maybe they don't want to return it. Has there ever been a discussion of upping that number because $100 now isn't what it was 10 years ago?
We had that discussion earlier this year because of inflation. We've even talked about, I know like reward items were brought up yesterday in Amanda's talk. That's one of the discussions that we have been having. And it's one of those things that we've got to kind of look at our budgets and see how we can handle that. There's a amberjack tag out there that's like $200. So we have looked at that and we're having those discussions about, planning for next year. What do we need to do? Looking at our tag numbers, what we're trying to get back, do we need to adjust those? Even with yellow tags. Historically, we call them our $5 tags. People don't turn in things for $5 anymore. You can't buy anything from McDonald's for $5. So there has been talk about that. Definitely. So red tags, we want to turn those in. That's the reason that you're going to cut off it. Also the same with yellow tags. A lot of the times those tag numbers are very, very small. Here, I'll go ahead and pass one of the fish around that has a tag in it, and you can actually see how small the numbers are. By the way, from yesterday's conversation, this is one of those rare over 26-inch trout. But you can see that is a conventional tag in that spotted sea trout right there. But you can see how small those tag numbers are. And so you can misread those so easily. If there's algae growing on that tag, it's so easy to misread it. So just go ahead and clip that tag off. That way, if I call you back later because I can't match that tag number with a fish in our database, you've got it in hand and can give that to me. Another reason that I want you to cut off the tag is I want you to reduce handling time of that fish. If you are a catch and release person, if you're sitting there trying to fiddle with the tag, trying to read the tag number, it's more handling time of that fish out of the water on the deck of your boat, on the pier, wherever it's at. So if you clip that tag off and release that fish, it is happy on its way and you're good to go. So that's another reason. And the question that comes, is it better data getting a second, third, and fourth recapture on that? The first recapture is the most important recapture. Honestly, it really, really is. More so because of modeling purposes with stock assessments. That is the most strongest and robust data point. As you go further into that second and third recapture, there's just not as many of those and it's not robust in the models. So that's why the first recapture matters the most. Cool, any questions? I'll keep going, oh yeah.
I was just going to point out, like, you're right. A lot of times the tags are so hard to read. They're covered with algae. And you've called me a couple times to try to remember to confirm what the number was that was reported. And I can't remember what the reason was, but you had a good reason to call me and say, hey, look at that tag one more time and make sure that number is correct.
Yes, yes. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and be honest. I am honest with the folks that I talk to. I know that people are going to ignore what I say. I work for the Division of Marine Fisheries. They're just going to do that. It happens. So there are going to be people out there who aren't going to cut off the tag. They just aren't. It's okay. If that happens, though, please just follow these simple directions. If you are not going to cut off the tag, then I really want you to take a picture of the tag. That's really going to help me out, just as Mr. Rollers mentioned. Like, if I can't read those tag numbers, I need to verify it some way. Otherwise, you're just not going to get a pretty packet and certificate. So if you're going to release that fish again, just make sure you get a good picture of the fish, but specifically a good picture of the tag and the tag number, clearly visible. You know, back in the day when we started the tagging program, smartphones just weren't as popular. Now they are. Everybody has them. There's no excuse not to take a picture. So take that picture. Even if you clip off the tag, take a picture of the tag later. You know how many times people have lost their tags? Happens all the time. So, yes.
How does Joe Blow know this information that you're telling us?
Outreach, 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 outreach. Amanda Masick, who you met yesterday, myself, Kevin Amon, and a lot of the staff here who work with the tagging program, we are out there on the ground trying to promote it. We kind of did a new branding package, I believe it was last year, trying to rebrand our programs and trying to get more information out there. So we're working diligently, going to the state fair, expos, fishing clubs. I went to 2 fishing clubs just in the past 2 weeks trying to speak about this. So we're just trying to get the word out. We've even done special programs at piers to get tourists to know about these programs. So it's all about outreach and it's about word of mouth and getting things out there.
Do you have these QR scans?
Yes,
That they do for citation?
Yes, so if you go out to the table, got a beautiful display table out there. There's actually the cards, let me go back. Oh, there we go. These cards are out there on the table. Grab one of those. On the back side of it is a QR code. There are stickers out there. If you look at the 4-tier little brochure thing, the first tier is our stickers. They are great waterproof stickers. Grab those, put them on your boat. They're right there, bam, catch your fish, scan, you're good to go. If you have other ideas, please send them our way. We want to get this out there. And by the way, if you take one of those cards, there's a little pewter fish pen too. So little incentive there as well. All right, what information do you need to report when you catch that tag fish? There is some information. I want to know the date of capture. What day did you capture the fish? I want to know the location of capture. Location, location, location. Let's talk about this. I don't want Neuse River. Please don't give me Neuse River. You know how big Neuse River is, Pamlico Sound is. If I'm looking at habitat use, habitat types, that does not help me at all. If you can give me coordinates, fantastic. If you can just give me a point, that would be fantastic. I promise you, you're gonna see maps later. I'm not gonna use your specific fishing locations for the public. Now, my husband and I may use them on the weekends. Just kidding, I'm just kidding. But we want those coordinates so we can track these fish better and mark those spots of we know important habitat types.
There's a free app for a smartphone that can give you the coordinates, Latin Launch.
Yes, Yes, and we are working. We know that technology has not always been on our side at the division. We are a state agency, and we're trying to work on newer apps and online tools so you can potentially drop a pin in that location when you turn in your tag return online. So we got some things in the works that we hope to put out there in the future. We want the tag number because we want to track your fish. So make sure you give us the unique tag number. We want the species. So give us that species. If you don't know the species, it's okay. Let us know. We'll try to track it down, take a picture of it if you're not sure. Happens all the time. We want the gears used for capture. If it's hook and line, cast net, gill net. Some people want us to tell us the mirror lure type. We don't really need to know the mirror lure color and stuff. Again, if you want to give us that information, my husband and I are building our tackle box. But, otherwise, we'd really just need to know hook and line. So, total length of that fish, pinch tail, as you see up here. We want the fate of the fish. Did you harvest the fish? Did you release the fish with the tag still on the fish, or did you release the fish with the tag cut off? And then we want to capture your personal information only because we want to send you an awesome reward packet. We don't spam you with extra stuff or anything. It's just to send your reward packet out. What's in that reward packet? It's a letter and certificate. It has information about where you caught the fish, when you caught the fish, and the same with us, where we originally caught the fish and tagged the fish, or maybe that volunteer tagger did that. And then yellow tags are what we call our low reward tags. So you can get a hat, fish towel, fish pin. As you can see up here, here's some of the hats and the fish pins on there. And those red tags are worth $100. In the past, if you got those $100 rewards, you'd have to wait 4 to 6 weeks for Raleigh to send you a check. We'd also have to collect your social security numbers. Well, that's no more. As of this year, we are now giving out $100 gift cards. No more collecting social security numbers. You get that gift card in the packet with your letter and certificate. If anybody's been through that process before, it was a pain. This is so much quicker now. So big win for the tagging program. All right, so let's switch gears a little bit and go into volunteer taggers. So that's how you return a tagged fish, but if you want to be on the other side of that, if you want to become a volunteer tagger, we've got that for you. I'm looking at multiple commissioners here who I know have actually gone through the process and are volunteer taggers. The first thing you need to do is to complete an online application. I've got the QR code right there on the screen. There's also a little flyer outside with that QR code. Scan it, it gets you into the application. That application goes straight to my inbox. I'm going to add you to an email list so you can get updates about the tagging program trainings. You'll attend an in-person training, lasts about 3 hours. You'll get an overview of the tagging program, review your tagging procedures and data collection. You're gonna get hands-on tagging experience, because that's the most important thing. Hands-on with real fish. We can't simulate being on a boat, rocking and the fish flopping and stuff like that, but we can at least get your hands on fish and you can feel what it's like to tag a fish. Some people, after going through the trainings, decide not for them, and that's okay. But we want you to have that time. And also it gives you one-on-one time with the biologist. So you can talk and ask questions. And we've had some really good discussions at our volunteer tagger trainings. And then if we have need in your area, because we don't want to oversaturate areas, we will give you an awesome tagging kit. And we have one on display today. Miss Sarah actually has her tagging kit with her today. There's over $200 plus of items in that tagging kit, and we've modified it over the years to, there you go, to have just all the things that you need. And we're always taking suggestions from volunteers to make it better and better and better. So that's the tagging kit that you would get if you became a volunteer tagger. All right, any questions? Yeah.
I may have missed this, but how close do you cut the tag off to the fish?
So when you cut the tag off, what you want to do as close to the body as you possibly can. So snip it off as close as you possibly can to the body. We don't want to pull or yank the tag because they're internal to the fish. If you pull or yank, then that could potentially rip, for lack of a better term, rip the insides out of the fish and you kill the fish if you're going to release it. So we only want to snip it and cut it off.
I thought about public education. I know a lot of people renew their license online. If we had maybe a link to, you want to make $100, where they could go and learn about the tagging program and all that, and do it at point of sale at the sports shops.
That'd be awesome. And what we're trying to do is definitely, we're trying to get to like the tackle shops and stuff to have our promotional gear there. So hence why we've done these stickers, why we've done these brochures and trying to get to those locations. And we kind of have, in partnership with the mandatory reporting stuff that's going on, we're hoping to use that as a catalyst to get more information out to these tackle shops. Yes.
So how many total red tags are out and where are they?
I can't tell you
There's
that.
4 in her box right there.
You're about to see the results of our program. That's where I'm about to head into now. So
And
you'll
what-
get to see
right, and
some
what
of
I
these.
really am interested in is what your goal is for density of
Yeah.
tags like that.
And each fit, it's
How many
each
red ones, proportion red, gives you the best returns and those kinds of questions?
15 to 25% depending on the species of red tags. Yellow tags we put out also as single and double tags, double tagging for retention. Again, that 15 to 25% depending on the species. And we also, with cobia, we actually only use red tags for cobia. Anybody know why? Only red tags for cobia. We talked about it yesterday. Highly migratory, passing right by us sometime. So if you're going to come in contact with a cobia, we want you to turn it in. So that's why we've incentivized it with a red tag and even double tags. We had someone this year already turn in a double tag. That's $200. And they actually went fishing with their grandsons, and they're like, well, they get to split the money, and we'll go for a fishing trip again. So
That's great. Commissioner Clausen?
Is there any particular areas along the coast that you're deficient in
Yes.
tags being?
yes. 100%. Yes.
What are some of those areas?
I
particular?
will go ahead, and God rest his soul, Glenn Swicegood, who was one of our amazing volunteer taggers out of the Fairfield area, recently passed away from cancer, but he was our Hyde County tagger. He would get out 200 to 400 tags each year for spotted sea trout. So we have a deficiency in that Hyde County area now, Stumpy, all the way out to Stumpy Point, those areas. We had a great tagger who was handled kind of the Outer Banks, behind the Outer Banks region. He's since moved on. We have need in that area. So we do have needs in specific areas. Morehead City, Bogue Sound, a lot of people down there right now. Same thing, Cape Fear, we've had a lot of people. But
So
we
the
do
Outer
have
Banks
needs.
is a deficient area?
Yes, I would say so.
Okay,
And
thank
we are looking at our fall trainings, and so we're hoping to have one of those trainings on the Outer Banks this year.
Okay,
Sounds like you got a new job.
thank you.
It's a lot of fun.
Looking forward to it.
So I was just curious what sort of mortality studies we have done based on the impacts of a tagging fish? Because, we're looking at natural mortality, but clearly putting tags in them is going to result
Yes.
in some mortality.
Yeah. So prior to kind of in the development of the 2014 tagging program, and subsequently after, we did pin studies for tagging of species, and those pin studies helped us look at some of those mortality rates. There's also other states who have done those mortality studies as well, and so we pulled from those states as well. All right. All right, we're going to move into the results section of this program. So, how many fish have we actually tagged? Well, we've tagged over 142,000 fish. Now, this is just from 2014 to 2023. If you add up all over the years, we're talking about over 300,000 plus. So we've tagged a lot of fish. Striped bass, we've tagged the most, mainly because we also tagged phase 2 hatchery striped bass that were released into the water. So that's why striped bass has the highest total count. Red drum is over 13,000, spotted sea trout over 13,000, southern flounder over 8,000, cobia over 590, and then total fish recaptures roughly around 3,500 for striped bass, 1,500 for red drum, 852 for spotted sea trout, 601 for southern flounder, and cobia 102. So those are our numbers so far. And these numbers are going to be in the FMP report that's just recently come out. So let's go in, oh yeah.
That's really high returns on cobia.
It
That's
is.
really high.
$100 tags. $100 tags. People are motivated by money. They're motivated by money.
But
And if
that's
we
like-
had an endless budget, all tags would be red.
But that's still a lot of those fish being caught. What's 17% mental math?
Yep,
Yeah,
it is.
so-
Yeah, it's the high reward tags. All right, so let's go into our individual species. So for striped bass tags, we tag them with internal anchor tags. They are monocore. As you can see, these are some pictures of our tagged striped bass. We tag them just behind the pectoral fin where that first stripe is. And you saw those internal anchor tags that we passed around earlier. So that's what it looks like. There is a phase 2 hatchery tagged fish up there. So you can see we tag them when they're small as well. Again, we've tagged over 106,000 striped bass from 2014 to now. I want to mention that, again, we talked about the maps and locations. So as you can see, this is kind of the broad scale that we're doing. We're not giving away your individual coordinates and stuff. Some of these dots can be a little bit misleading. If you look up at that Roanoke River Rapids area, you only see like one dot potentially there, but that's thousands of fish underneath that dot because we know we tag on the spawning grounds with WRC through electrofishing surveys. But the purple circles, those are going to be the releases from 2014 to 2022, and then the triangles are the releases for 2023. So you can see there are coverage areas that we may not get to every single year. Now for striped bass returns, again, over 3,500. And so you can see that we actually have northern movement on those striped bass. They are going all the way up into New Jersey area. And these are those fish that are becoming part of that Atlantic stock. But they will still come back and spawn in our river systems. The average days at large is 263 days. When I say average days at large, I just want you to understand that is the time between the tagging event and the recapture event. So that's how we calculate that. The max days is over 2,400 or 6.7 years. And I'll give you a little caveat to this. This is just for 2014. We've been tagging striped bass a lot longer. In the Roanoke River, we had a fish that was returned after 25 years. In the Tar-Pamlico River, last year we just had 2 fish. A gentleman was fishing off the Washington Bridge, hit a school of striped bass. He caught 2 fish within an hour of each other that were tagged 15 years prior from our hatchery studies, where the hatchery fish were released in the Tar-Pamlico River. So those are exciting data points to see for us. Now then, I'm going to move to average distance traveled. This term can be very misleading. Conventional tags are point A to point B tags. We cannot track a fish every single place where it swims. We do not have that ability with those conventional tags. So when I say average distance traveled, it is from the point of original tagging to the point of recapture. It may have swam thousands of miles in between, but we just don't know that from our conventional tagging. So the average distance traveled for all these fish is generally about 38 miles, but the max distance traveled for striped bass was 579 miles. And so to delve a little bit deeper into these fish, here's the one that was out for 6.2 years. Only a mile apart from its original tagging location to where it was recaptured. But we can see that it had a growth rate of about 12.9. So we know it was out there, we know it was growing and stuff, but it's coming back to that potential area. Again, maybe the importance of looking at some of the habitat types and stuff. So this is kind of some of the things that we see. But then we've got fish that swim further. So this fish right here was out for only 119 days, but traveled 579 miles during that time. So one of these fish that spawned probably in our Roanoke River area, but is moving out to the Atlantic and joining that Atlantic stock. So this is really important information for us to see on our species. So
Did you see last week the white marlin recapture tagged from the Billfish Foundation?
I did not know.
So there was a white marlin recaptured in Maryland that was tagged 11 months earlier in Africa.
Nice.
And so it's the first known white marlin that's traveled the entire Atlantic Ocean. So that's over 4,000 nautical miles in less than a year.
That's
So
awesome.
it's like if you drew a straight line, that'd be 12 miles a day that had to travel.
That's awesome. We are networking more. There's now a World Volunteer Tagger Summit that we're a part of, trying to link all these tagging programs together across New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, Great Britain, Canada, and us. So we're trying to share our data and figure out programs because we have fish doing that. One of the most interesting, I get tag returns from everywhere. I've gotten tag returns from South Africa, not our fish. I get tag returns for brown trout all the time from Idaho, not our fish, tried to explain these things. But one of the most interesting ones we got, it was an acoustic tag that came out of a tuna, and ended up, we tracked it down, and the tuna was tagged in Louisiana. So we see this happening all the time. So it's amazing to see fish movement. Fish have tails, fish move. It's great information to see. So what we've gleaned from tagging studies and our other scientific research for striped bass, we know that there's 4 defined spawning stocks, which are the Roanoke, Tar, Pamlico, Neuse, and Cape Fear rivers. We know that they migrate north and south seasonally, and they move into the rivers in the spring to spawn. They remain in coastal sounds and estuaries longer than those in the Chesapeake Bay striped bass before they migrate out into the Atlantic Ocean. Charlton Godwin, he has done some amazing research over the years working with striped bass. And so, Albemarle Roanoke stock, 9% of the 8-year-old fish and 33% of the 9-year-old fish migrate to the Atlantic Ocean of that stock. And then we see that southern stocks, so those that are below the Albemarle Sound all the way down to Georgia, Florida, those types of areas, they do not participate in the long coastal migrations like these northern stocks of striped bass do. All right, let's move on to red drum. So red drum tags are our internal anchor tags for our smaller fish. So any fish that's 27 inches or less is gonna get that internal anchor tag. Do not clip that red tag off, I'm watching y'all, So any fish, though, that is 27 inches or larger, we consider our bull drum, and those are gonna get our stainless steel dart tags. Those dart tags are located near the dorsal fin. Those fish will shed those internal anchor tags, hence we look at tag types, looking at studies, and that dart tag works better for a bull drum. Please know, and I'm just saying this for the public out there, that a puppy drum, a bull drum, and a red drum are the same species. I get that question all the time. There's only one species, it's red drum, but we have different terms for their different sizes and age classes. So I said we tagged over 13,599 red drums so far. As you can see, this is the distribution. Again, our goal is to tag across the entirety of North Carolina from Virginia down to the South Carolina line. We want to get as many tags as we possibly can out there and coverage areas as much as we possibly can. We do this from the division sampling programs, working with other agencies, working with university researchers and our volunteer taggers. So what we see with red drum, over 1,500 recaptures so far, we see northern movement with red drum. That's the majority of what we see. We are either caught here back in North Carolina or we see that northern movement up into the Chesapeake Bay. The average days at large were 241. Max was about 6.2 years. Again, we've been tagging red drum longer. So every year I get a fish recaptured that's 16 years out, 17 years out. The max one I think is 23 years for red drum. So we are seeing fish from our previous tagging studies being recaptured. This is just for the time series from 2014. The average distance traveled was 17 miles, but max distance is 437. So looking at those fish, this is the one that was out for 6.2 years. It traveled 147 miles. It did have a growth rate of about 10.5 inches. So tagged in Oregon Inlet and then recaptured in Tangler Sound, Maryland. And then for our furthest distance traveled, well, this fish wanted to go party in Atlantic City. So it was tagged in Pony Pen, North Carolina, and recaptured in Atlantic City, New Jersey. It grew about 16 inches. Those younger red drum do have a faster growth rate. And I always tell people, they're looking at growth rates and they're questioning growth rates and stuff. This is data reported by the public. We've measured it a certain way, the public measured it a certain way. We don't know if they used a golden rule or the top of their cooler. So there's always wiggle room in growth rates and stuff. So always keep that in mind. All right, what we've learned about red drum, there is high site fidelity. Young fish do tend to stay in the same system for the first 2 years of their life. And then adult fish return to those same areas during different seasons. So right now, we're heading into that prime time of bull drum coming into our coastal rivers. So adult inshore movement is that spring and summer, and that outward movement fall to winter. We know the portion of the stock migrates between North Carolina and Virginia, and they spawn in the estuaries and inlets here in North Carolina. And so they're managed as one stock, North Carolina and North, and we've seen that through tagging studies and genetics. And as we know, there's a stock assessment going on right now for red drum. And all of our tagging data was provided for those stock assessments. Moving on to spotted sea trout. We passed the spotted sea trout around. Those are those internal anchor tags. So if you clip the tag off and release the fish, it could get recaptured again and reported. Spotted sea trout releases over 13,000, and as you can see, again, similar to the other species, we're trying to get as much coverage area as we possibly can across the state. But there are data gaps. Every year there's data gaps, and so we're looking for coverage in those areas. 852 total recaptured fish. Average days at large, 147. Max, about 3 years. And the average distance traveled is 35 miles, but max of 298 miles. Again, we see that northern movement in spotted sea trout just like we see with red drum. The most days at large, that 3-year fish, that was 2017 to 2020, traveled on 148 miles from South River all the way to Little Creek, Virginia. And it grew about 6 inches during that time. And then the furthest distance traveled, again, from point A to point B, we don't know where it went in between. It was out for 164 days, but traveled 298 miles from Sloka Creek all the way up to Maryland. I'm not going to pronounce that name because I'm going to butcher it. So. But as we saw, there was a very small growth rate in that fish. Well, we know with spotted sea trout, we've seen high site fidelity. Most fish are tagged in the area, and then they're kind of recaptured in that same system. Move it north in the spring, south in the fall, disperse throughout the sounds in the summertime, but then they congregate in those creeks and coastal areas in the wintertime. And we know that's one of the things that makes them susceptible to those cold stuns. Like I said, knock on wood, we haven't gotten a cold stun in a while, but they're highly susceptible to that, so we've got to be careful. And they're currently managed as one stock, North Carolina and Virginia. All right, moving on to southern flounder. This is my kid's favorite tag. It's called the spaghetti tag. If you unravel it out, it's about a 12-inch piece of tag, and so it looks like a piece of spaghetti. But then you tie it to the fish, hand this one down. Here is our example southern flounder. We do tag southern flounder, yellow tags, double tagged with yellow tags, and high reward tags. People ask me if tags hurt the fish. I say it's like an ear piercing. So, we've tagged over 8,500 southern flounder, and again, you see that dispersal that we're trying to do. We're trying to get it from state line to state line. You're going to notice that there are some fish that were tagged, a little bit up past Kinston and Fayetteville area. Those are legit tagged fish. They were tagged through our electrofishing samplings that we do. So legit fish tagged all the way up there. I've been on some of those boats and seen that happen. So the interesting thing about southern flounder, compared to red drum, compared to spotted sea trout, is we see southern movement in southern flounder. We don't see the northern movement. So we've had 601 total recaptures. We've had average days out, about 147. But the longest one out was 4.8 years. And the average distance traveled is 17 miles, but the max is 518. So looking at these individual fish, I love this fish's story because we've been doing a lot with southern flounder management. If you were at the Southern Flounder Symposium, we saw a lot of research projects that are looking at fish, looking at spawning grounds, what these fish are doing. So this fish right here was out for 4.8 years, tagged in 2015, recaptured in 2020. It's only 8 miles from where it was originally tagged to where it was recaptured. But I like to think about this fish because I look at those growth rates. I look at a 14.6-inch growth rate, and I see the size that it reached up to, 28 inches. We can surmise that this was probably a spawning female. And imagine during that 4.8 years that she went offshore, hopefully spawned, came back in. Offshore again, hopefully spawned, came back in. And did that for that 4.8 years. These are the stories that tagging data tells us. It gives me goosebumps. I don't know if it does for y'all, but I guess that's why I'm a scientist. But this is the cool stuff. This is the stuff that we want to see and we're excited about as a scientist. And the same with the next slide. Here's that southern flounder. The max distance traveled 518 miles. It was tagged in Hogpen Bay, North Carolina, but then caught in Hobie Sound, Florida. And we checked these fish out because I get a lot of phone calls from fish down in Georgia, South Carolina, and the first question I ask is, did you catch the fish? We've had fish tag returns from fish houses, from people buy seafood, and it turns out that it was a dealer who bought fish in North Carolina and they were selling it in Georgia. So we check to make sure these are legit catches. And so this is one of those. So this fish trucked it down there 184 days. We just got another one in from Fernandina Beach this year. So we know our fish are moving south. So what we've learned about southern flounders, they're high spring and summer site fidelity. Our early season tagged fish are recaptured in the same system before they move out to fall migration. Those larger tagged fish in the fall are very highly migratory. Our general movements, we do see that the larger mature fish migrate to the ocean beginning late summer and early fall. And the portion of the stock does migrate south to South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. Fish do return to the North Carolina estuaries after the migration into the ocean. There is limited tagging data from South Carolina, Georgia, and suggest a low probability that adult fish move north into the North Carolina waters. And as we know, through what we've been doing with our fisheries management plan, it is a combined stock. Yes?
Has it ever been thought to take North Carolina tags to another state and tag those fish with North Carolina tags in that state to see if you can get reverse movements back out of that? Has that ever been an idea tossed around?
We do have, those other states are tagging those fish as well. And so a lot of that is looked through the stock assessments. I don't have specifics. I don't know if like for southern flounder, if Holly or Ann have any information on that. But we do try to, it is slightly frowned upon for us to go to other states and tag their fish without their permission. So it's definitely something that we can look at working together to do. But we do share our data and we look at those things.
Sure, I just was wondering, it's just a science project, really. Yeah. I mean, nothing consistent, but just, it would be interesting to see, if you sent these number tags and you have serialized tags out of state, where fish were in a particular, talking about East Coast stocks and all this other stuff, but, tag with North Carolina tags outside of the state and see if you can get the fish to come back to North Carolina, just a reverse type of situation.
And I think
something coming, I've never heard anybody speak.
I think there's some university researchers who have done that. I know Charlton wants to speak real quick. Yeah, I'm about to get to that one. Yep, I will. No problem. Yes. Right. Oh, no problem. And so I will just say some of it also does come down to funding. Just to be completely clear, some of it comes down straight to funding. Oh, yeah. And like I said, as Ann mentioned, all the data is shared when we're looking at stock assessments and stuff. Just like with the red drum stock assessment going right now, all the states have, provided their data for red drum. CDAR is going on for cobia right now. All the states are giving their cobia data to look at those stock assessments and stuff and those movements, so.
You never hear about another state's tags being captured in North Carolina, or at least I haven't.
They are. Okay. I get those tag returns all the time.
I just lack of knowledge. That's where the question came from.
Yep, we get those tags all the time, and I am in communication with Susanna Musick. She's the coordinator for VIMS up in Virginia, and then Joey Cuz is with South Carolina DNR, and we have emails, I feel like every month about, is this your tag, and double checking those things, yep.
I mean, kind of on Commissioner Blanton's comments, and I'm just adding this from my own experience. I've participated in a lot of telemetry tagging programs,
yes.
And what people may not realize is y'all share all that data,
yes.
and fish from other states ping on that all the time, and so you get fish from all across East Coast.
Over.
So it's fascinating, right? So like telemetry fish that we've tagged have popped up in the Gulf, they've popped up off of Massachusetts. So it's really cool. That data is really shared, and it's really interesting.
Yeah.
You just may not see it.
And we are partners with the Atlantic Cooperative Telemetry Network that actually shares data with researchers. It's part of the OTN, the Ocean Tracking Network, and we partner also with FACT, which is that Florida Acoustic Network as well. So we are putting our data into that, getting pings on our fish, but a lot of researchers are getting pings on their fish. And those organizations were formed as data sharing. So it wasn't just a researcher having to contact all these individual agencies. They have a one hub now for getting their telemetry data.
Got you. Just one more follow-up. It would be really interesting to see like a presentation the next time you might get a chance for educational purposes, especially for me, because I'm sort of clueless of how robust the East Coast and Gulf of Mexico tagging, how I would love to see some mixing and some information from other tags captured in the state of North Carolina from other states, just to see like point A to point B, hey, we tagged here in Florida. It got captured in whatever, North Carolina. It'd just be interesting to see some of that
Understand.
beyond North Carolina's tags, just how
Yeah.
the intermixing sort of looks, just for my better understanding, because I assume some of the other commissioners could benefit from that as well.
I'd like to see that too.
What we have realized, and it's not just us, it's other state agencies, that we don't do the best job of showcasing our data online, but it's also, we're having to be delicate with this because we don't want to give those fishing locations away. So some of the states are moving to a new GIS program called Survey 123 that actually helps with some of that mapping. And so we're kind of working towards that to hopefully start showcasing that, and the other states are actually using that program as well. Joey Cuz at South Carolina DNR, they're working on theirs, but again, it takes time to develop those things. But it's something that I agree. We'll work on that and see what we can do for an upcoming meeting.
In the wildlife vein, there are a lot of tagging programs,
Yes.
including for people that are donating funds into the program, right? Sea turtles, sharks, lots of other things. And so I'm just wondering if there's an element here, since fish are wildlife too, and particularly for large groupers and the gag and that kind of stuff. It would be interesting to look at having the public help fund these programs that way.
Understand, definitely. And there are other organizations like South Atlantic and stuff. There's other programs that do tag some of those, offshore species and stuff,
OSEARCH
and
lots
universities.
of
Yes,
those
yeah.
other things.
But I agree.
But you can adopt them adopt them online. It becomes your turtle, your fish, or whatever.
We have actually thrown that out before, and it more so came down to staff resources and keeping up with that and stuff. We are transitioning to a new database right now, currently at the division, and we're hoping to have more capabilities with that, but that is something actually we have discussed. Yes.
How does the robustness of our program in North Carolina compares to the others along the East Coast?
Well, I'm biased and think ours is awesome. But there's some great tagging programs. It's kind of apples to oranges and stuff. Like Virginia, for instance, their tagging program is completely volunteer driven, but they only tag with what they call T-bar tags. And so those T-bar tags do tend to fail. They're not long-term tags. And so they're tagging like thousands upon thousands each year with their volunteer tagger program. But some of the long-term stuff they don't have as compared to us. So they're getting more tags out there, but it's not necessarily better data because they're not seeing some of that long-term stuff. And that's one of the things that I like to value about our program is there's university researchers out there who, their tagging studies are for the life of that grad student, whether it's a master's student for 2 years, a PhD student for 4 years. And so we get little snapshots of things, and it's fantastic. It's great data. But sometimes we don't have those long-term studies so we can look at trends. We're talking about climate change, SAV and stuff. So this tagging data, we can look at some of those things. And I always say the day that we get a southern flounder from our state that goes to Virginia, we're going to be calling each other and be like, what's going on here? We got to check this out, So that's one of the things, beauty of our tagging program is we have that baseline for the past 10 years. And honestly, for some species like striped bass red drum, we've had it longer through a time series.
So we're better than average, or is that
I
what you're
can't.
saying?
I don't feel like I'd put my foot in my mouth if I said. I think we have a very, very strong program, and we're only growing and getting better. So. Cobia. Okay, someone's interested in cobia. All right, let's get to cobia. All right, so for cobia, red tags only. High reward, red tags only, high migratory. 590 of those. As you can see, tagging efforts have been across the state. You see, of course, these are more offshore. Since it's more of an offshore species. We do get the smaller guys inshore, but they're not taggable. So you can see a lot more offshore, but through collaborative studies with universities, VIMS, other groups, we have tagged up into the Chesapeake Bay area. So we have that. And then those recaptures, 102, what we do see, of course, we get a lot of recaptures in the Chesapeake Bay, but then we get a lot of recaptures going south. Average days at large, 412 days, so usually it's that year cycle. So we tag them, it's usually the following year that they get recaptured. Max timeout for this time series is 3.3 years. I think that's gonna change next year based off some tag returns I've gotten this year. Average distance travel is 120 miles, but max is 696, and you can imagine what fish that was. So long time out, 3.3 years, tagged in 2017, recaptured in 2020, tagged off Pea Island Beach, just above Rodanthe, and then recaptured offshore in Bethany Beach, Delaware. Grew roughly 17 inches during that time. There you go. And then the one that traveled the furthest, 696 miles, of course, tagged in the mouth of Chesapeake Bay, Virginia, and then recaptured offshore in Vero Beach, Florida. We did not get a recapture length on this. It happens all the time. We don't get a recapture length. Just because you don't get the length doesn't mean we don't want you to turn in the data. Any data is important to us. And this fish was out 1.5 years. So what we glean from cobia, we know there's seasonal migration, movement more north to the spring, south in the fall, evidence of some overwintering offshore with that east-west movement. And the multiple stocks mixing zones. So we're looking at that stock delineation, the Atlantic and Gulf migratory groups, East Florida mixing zone, and tagging informs us also with some of the genetic data. All right. Ooh, do you have a question? Okay, no problem. All right, so where can you learn more about the tagging program? Through our website and our social media posts. We post weekly on hashtag Tagging Tuesdays, so you'll see information about angler recaptures, but also events and programs that are doing with the tagging program. Or you can go to our website. If you have frequently asked questions, we have a page for that. We are coming out with our first ever annual report because we have heard you and we know that our data has not gotten out there. So our first annual report will be coming out this fall, and we hope to move forward to with some website components so we can have some dashboard and interactive maps and stuff for y'all. It's not gonna happen this fall, but we're moving towards that. But the annual report replaces the old volunteer tagger letters. So if you're a volunteer tagger, each year you'd get letters from us with your recaptures and stuff, and this annual report is gonna replace that, and you're gonna see all of the division tagging effort and volunteer tagging effort. And then again, if you wanna learn more, outreach programs. If you have a fishing club, a group, a church group, a school, we love to come talk about the tagging program and get the word out about it. And with that, this is my contact information, Amy Staples, tagging program biologist. Contact me, I'm happy to go and speak wherever you'd like me to go. Yes.
Any other questions?
So first of all, I'm gonna go back to Kobe real quick, but the annual report is a wonderful idea. I mean, it's not just great science, but it's great outreach for the division. And this is a sort of communication to the angling public. People just nerd out on this stuff. And so like, I love to see it, and I think you're gonna get a lot of good feedback. Back to cobia, I mean, we commented earlier when we saw the initial tag returns, you had about a 17% return rate. That terrifies me in terms of fishing mortality. I mean, that is a really high return rate. So my question is they're all $100 tags. How does the return rate of $100 tags in cobia compare to return rates of other species? Does that make sense? What I'm asking is it?
And I don't have those numbers off the top of my head. Tag return rates, they're actually I don't know if they're in the FMP, but they will be in our annual report. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but generally our other species just in total tags altogether is generally anywhere from 6 to 13%. And then generally, I really can't give you a number on red tags. I'd have to go back and pull that data. I just don't have the number off the top of my head.
Just from a data standpoint, I would be interested in that.
Yeah, definitely.
Anybody else? I have enjoyed the heck out of being part of this program. And I could be a real nerd about it too. But I'll take my granddaughter out fishing, let her catch the speckled trout, and show her how we're tagging and what we're doing and all that stuff. Yep, you got
I got your
my
data card
Okay,
right here.
Good enough. And it's given her an insight into being a responsible sportsman or sports person. And it's just, I've enjoyed it. It's been good.
I'm glad to hear that. And we take suggestions all the time for ways for improving the program. If you're a volunteer tagger, and we're working similar to Amanda on a tier system where if you tag so many fish, you get this item and this item. So we're taking as much as we can into consideration and doing what we can with the resources and staffing that we have available. But thank you so much for supporting this program, and thank you for your curiosity into it. And I hope we can provide more feedback on the questions that you have asked.
Sure thing. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much, Amy. Appreciate it. Okay, we're winding down. Last thing we have is issues from commissioners. Can I hear from any of my fellow commissioners? If you have anything you want to be brought up in the future or any questions, concerns, or what have you? I believe that's a first. Go ahead.
Just going forward, we've talked about, obviously we have Falls Albacore coming forward, but we've talked about Bonita, and that's something that I feel pretty strongly about, getting the recreational angler to have more accountability and responsibility. And I've talked about it before of what I've seen the past couple of years and the egregious, harvest of Bonita. And so I would like to see us, as a group, be proactive in that species and enforce some regulations as far as bag limits, vessel limits, et cetera, tackle restrictions.
Okay. Sounds good. Director?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Commissioner Hopgood, we are working on issue paper to dive into the potential Bonita management.
Okay, great. Commissioner Roller?
Just real quick, I know you're working on it. I just want to reiterate, I'm looking forward to seeing the paper on the ways in which to enforce South Atlantic for hire permits.
Yes, we are working on that as well, and I believe, Tricia's not here, I believe I saw a draft come across my desk, and I think it's going to our internal management group pretty soon to look at, so we're getting there.
Okay, great. Anybody else? Well, I've got one thing. I have asked the governor not to reappoint me to the commission. I have been doing this for over 12 years, which has been over 50 meetings, and it's time. We've had some hits and we've had some misses. But I have been very honored to serve my state on this commission and as its chairman. It has been, I appreciate the trust that's been put in me and my fellow commissioners, and this is something I don't take lightly. I want to say a couple things about the staff. I've seen staffs come and go over the years. This staff and this director are the best I have seen. Y'all have passion, y'all have knowledge, and in the end, the resource is going to win out. And I want to personally thank everyone here for the work and the job that y'all are doing. Thank you. And my fellow commissioners, I've had several commissions over the years. This commission seems to be very focused and very dedicated, ask great questions, not worried about the time involved in serving, and I'm proud to be considered one of y'all's fellow commissioners. This is not because of any issues here recently, be it joint waters or dealing with the current flounder situation in joint waters. It's just the fact it's been 12 years, and it's time. It's time for new blood, new ideas, kind of to move on a little bit. But I'll always be, at heart, one of your commissioners. And I will not be far. I mean, I'm going to be around for a bit. And I've told the governor's office that if they need me to do it, I will continue to serve through the year, through the November meeting, if they have yet to find a suitable replacement. I've given them some thoughts and some ideas on things, and they may replace me this afternoon, or it may be December the 31st. And so we'll just see how that goes. But believe it or not, with all the controversy and all that we've had and all the butting our heads against the wall from time to time, I've truly enjoyed this. I really have. I've learned a lot, made some good friendships, and I feel like I'm a better person for this. So with that, I say thank you all for serving with me and be willing to do something positive for the resource. So we got one last item. Jesse, would you take us through the meeting assignments and a preview of the agenda for next meeting?
Certainly can, Chairman Bizzle. And real quick, I just want to say, I don't have any frame of reference because you're the only chairman that I've ever actually been a liaison for. So it
So I'm
very
the best
well
you've
could
ever
be
had,
that
right?
You're not great, but I've thoroughly enjoyed working with you.
Better than average.
Better than average.
So the commission would like to be briefed on the discussions occurring between NOAA, the regional councils, and the states regarding how a changing climate is impacting fisheries. The division will be taking a deeper dive into the significant involvement language in the SCUFFLE eligibility process and bringing information back to the commission about that topic. The commission would like to see a presentation on the fish recaptured in North Carolina from tagging programs that occur in other states. The division will also be taking a closer look at sheep's head landings and effort data and will update the commission on what that data shows. Regarding the draft spotted sea trout amendment, more options will be included to cover a broader range of possibilities that meet the reductions that are necessary. And those options will include a broader look at season closures that aren't wintertime closures. At your next meeting, which is scheduled to occur November 20th through the 22nd in Emerald Isle, you are scheduled to receive the draft amendments to the oyster fishery management plan and the hard clam fishery management plan, and you will vote to send those plans out to public and advisory committee review. Also at that meeting, you will select your preferred management options for Amendment 1 to the Spotted Sea Trout FMP, and you will receive a presentation on federal for-hire permits. Tom, we haven't forgot about you. And lastly, as you heard from Charlie Deaton earlier, you will receive another presentation on submerged aquatic vegetation protection in North Carolina. And that's all I have.
Great. All right. If there is no other business that needs to be conducted at this time, Director?
Mr. Chairman, if I could just say a few words about your escape here.
Never looked at it that way, but maybe
Yeah,
so.
yeah. Yes, we should.
Try. With the red tag.
Absolutely, that is definitely a high reward tag. That'd be a high reward tag right there. Just a couple of comments from me. I've worked with several chairs, but you have been here 12 years, so you've been here nearly half of my career for sure. And it has just been a relationship in my mind that has grown over the years. And I've not had the pleasure of working with a chair that cared more about this staff and supporting the division and what we do as a group than you. And certainly a chair that has supported what we all do together collectively and supported the resources of the state of North Carolina. So it has been an honor and a pleasure to work with you, and you will absolutely be missed at this table, but I have your personal cell phone number.
Yes,
so
you
I'll
do.
just continue to remind you of that, and thank you for your service. And we do have a little, I don't know where it is. Oh, here it is. Here it comes. We do have a little something just to give you, but I will tell folks too. First, this is I gotta put my glasses on and see what it says. This is a special citation that we've got. Thank Amanda for putting this together.
Thank you.
For Chairman Bills, and it says, whose 12 years of dedicated service have been judged exceptional. So, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for those kind words. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
And yeah. And one last thing is, as it's pretty normal for the government, we weren't completely prepared for this, so At the November meeting, we will, Mr. Chairman, if you are not still serving as chair, our meeting is in Emerald Isle, and we would, if we can get you back at the November meeting, we would appreciate that so that we do have some additional awards for you and some other things that we'd like to put together and prepare a little bit for.
Well, thank you very much for those very special words and for the warmth and love I've felt here today. So thank you all. And as my last act, maybe, I hereby call this meeting adjourned.